Chapter 11:21. Pei Chichi replied with a hum and put her little hands around his shoulders. She was particularly delicate as she called him brother in his ear, intending to tease him. Tang Yu knew what she was thinking and patted her as a punishment. Later, she was so sleepy that she fell asleep on her stomach. Tang Yu listened to her light breathing and his eyes softened. Chichi, I miss you very much. Tang Yu, I miss you very much too. Her dream was sweet and fragrant. She dreamed that she was lying on Tang Yu's shoulder. He asked her who she liked. She said that she liked her father. She was spanked on her little butt. Later, she said to him, Tang Yu's father. Tang Yu's father? Pei Chichi was awakened by her own abnormal thoughts. When she woke up, it was already dawn. The morning after the rain was particularly fresh. She sat up and found a white rose on the bedside table. She smiled and picked up the rose. After looking at it for a long time, she smiled. She got off the bed barefoot, opened the window, took a deep breath and turned around. She saw a little person sitting on her bed, Xiaoshan. Xiaoshan was wearing a white dress and carrying a small bag on her back. She sat neatly on her bed. Pei Chichi blinked her eyes. Towards this little fellow who could very well be her own child, her feelings were especially complicated. Was this little rascal really her child? She looked at the little rascal, and the little rascal was also looking at her. After a while, Xiaoshan pouted her little mouth. Chichi, you don't seem surprised at all. Pei Chichi immediately gave two stiff ha's. I'm very surprised. May I ask, how did you come in? Dad brought me here. Xiaoshan said confidently. Dad is on a business trip for 2 days. I want to stay here with you. Pei Chichi coughed lightly. You know about our relationship. Dad said that his YY chromosome and your X chromosome crossed together, so I was born. Xiaoxin's little face was taut. Pei Chichi, don't tell me you don't want to admit it. Pei Chichi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was as if she had used him and then abandoned him. But she saw through Xiaoxin's bluff. The little fellow was fierce, but in his heart, he was afraid that she did not love her. Pei Chichi walked over, bent down and looked at Xiaoshan seriously. I may not be able to accept that I have a daughter, but I like Xiaoshan very much. I can call you sister. Xiaoshan said with some dislike. I've called you that before anyway. Pei Chichi did not know whether to laugh or cry. She dropped another bomb in her heart. In the past, you often called Dad Big Brother. Sometimes, you even called him Dad like me. Pei Chichi was stunned. Was there really such a pervert? Was it better if she didn't recover her memory? Xiaoshan fell into her arms and hugged her tightly. Then, she burst into tears. Xiaoshan was extremely scared without her mother by her side for a long time. She was afraid that Chichi would never come back. Now, she was afraid that Chichi would not like her. She was even more afraid that Chichi would never remember her and did not want her anymore. Chichi, Xiaoshan missed you so much. Xiaoshan lay in her arms and moved her little mouth in her arms. Pei Chichi's heart softened and she unbuttoned her clothes. Xiaoshan lay down contentedly and ate. Although she did not have any, she always smelled good in her mother's arms. Xiaoshan chirped a few times and then cried in dissatisfaction. Why did her little milk bottle smell like smoke? Dad must have eaten it secretly. Chapter 11:22. Xiaoshan started to cry. Pei Chichi was a little confused. She had sacrificed herself, but the little rascal was still not satisfied. Xiaoshan cried for a while, but no one comforted her. Mother is bad. Pei Chichi was actually a little bit of a prankster. It was quite interesting to see Xiaoshan like this. It was just like when Tang Yu watched her cry. Sometimes, he would not feel sorry for her, but he would appreciate it for a while. Xiaoshan cried even harder. She held it with her little hands and forced herself to eat a few more mouthfuls. Then, she cried and fell asleep. Pei Chichi found it a little funny and her heart softened. She reached out and touched the little fellow's little head. There was a thin layer of sweat on the little fellow's forehead because of crying. Baby, let's take a bath together, okay? She rubbed the slightly curly hair. She had a feeling that she was willing to give everything she had to the little person in front of her. Xiaoshan cried and cried, but when she heard this, She was revived. Her eyes widened as she looked at Pei Chichi. Really? Pei Chichi carried the little person into the bathroom, filled the bath with warm water and lay down with the little fellow. Xiaoshen sat on her waist and was very happy. Pei Chichi lowered her head and looked at the shallow scar on her waist and then at Xiaoshen. Her eyes were a little warm. This was her child. She reached out to touch her and easily accepted this reality. Just when she was feeling touched, the bathroom door was opened. She looked up at the godlike man at the door in confusion. Her little mouth was a little wide open. Tang Yu did not expect to see such a scene when he came back after the flight was cancelled. But he soon smiled happily and leaned against the door. Taking a bath early in the morning? You will feel dizzy if you soak in it for a long time. Pei Chichi used Xiaoshen to cover her body and poked her head out. Aren't you on a business trip? He was wearing a formal handmade suit and looked elegant. She noticed that he was even wearing cufflinks. He should be going to an important business event. Her little face was bitter. Why did he come back? Tang Yu took off his coat and threw it aside. He then took off his cufflinks and rolled his sleeves up to his elbows. If she still didn't know anything, then when he unbuttoned his shirt one by one and put on his belt, what else did Pei Chichi not know? She closed her eyes and said in a weak voice, Tang Yu, be careful. His body was submerged in the warm water. Fortunately, the bathtub was big enough, and he was on the other side just enough to touch her feet. He moved over and grabbed her little feet. If Xiaoshen isn't here, do you have any thoughts? Pei Chichi snorted. Of course not. She covered herself, but she didn't know that covering herself like this made her look even more alluring. Tang Yu calmly carried little Shinshin down from her body and placed her on his waist. Chapter 11:23. Pei Chichi bit her lip. It's up to you. He looked at her again. I'm discussing with you, Chichi. This was an ordinary sentence, but it had a profound meaning. She was a little stunned and couldn't say anything for a long time. Tang Yu smiled again. Chichi? She came back to her senses and was in a daze for a moment. She finally understood that he was discussing this matter with her as Xiaoxin's mother, but she was not ready yet. This was different from playing with Xiaoshen. This change in identity made her feel a little helpless. Tang Yu reached out and carried her over. Xiaoshen sat in front while she sat behind him. Pei Chichi felt a strange feeling the moment she sat on him. She shifted her body uneasily, but the more she moved, the more she was stuck there. Tang Yu did not seem to feel anything. He propped himself up and hugged Xiaoshen forward. Pei Chichi immediately moved forward. That feeling made Tang Yu exhale deeply, and his gaze became deeper. I bought a chain of institutions, and all their teachers are here. Take a look. Who do you think is suitable to be Xiaoxin's tutor? Tang Yu handed the phone to her. Pei Chichi took it and sat on him. She looked through them one by one and pouted. They seemed to be very young and good-looking. Xiaoshen can call them little sister. Tang Yu smiled. Are you jealous? Of course not. She looked very cute and pouted. As long as you like them. She threw the phone back to him and hugged Xiaoshen. Your father is going to find you a new mother. Xiaoshen covered her little face and howled. Tang Yu sat up and pinched Pei Chichi's little face. Nonsense. He was angry and amused at the same time. She was a little old, but it seemed like she could live again. Although she used to act coquettishly, she did not act like this. Since she was fooling around, Tang Yu was also fooling around. He held her waist and moved her back a little. Pei Chichi wailed and stared at him with tears in her eyes. But because of her little heart, she could only bite her lips and endure the piercing pain. Tang Yu chuckled. Are you still going to spout nonsense? She got through it, grinding her teeth, meaning to bite him. Tang Yu chuckled and moved closer to her ear. Then, carry Xiaoshen outside? Pei Chichi leaned down and bit his waist. Tang Yu's gaze was a little distant. He pulled her little head up and kissed her little mouth. He wrapped himself around her and kissed her again and again. His little heart was screaming in the middle, as if he was about to drown. Pei Chichi hammered him. Be careful, but the sound was swallowed back into his stomach. He chuckled. Don't worry about her. This kiss ignited the fire in his whole body. In the end, Tang Yu took a cold shower for half an hour. When he returned to the bedroom, the adult and the child were sitting on the bed and building blocks. The scene was very loving. Tang Yu looked at them silently for a while and threw a towel in front of her. "Help me dry my hair." He sat down to play with Xiaoshen, and she naturally knelt behind him to dry his hair. At that moment, some fragmented scenes kept flashing in his mind. Pei Chichi shook her head and looked at Tang Yu in front of her. Her lips moved and she called out, "Tang Yu." Chapter 11:24. Tang Yu looked at her with a deep gaze. Stretching out his hand, he gently ruffled her long hair and called her name. She raised her head and opened her mouth slightly. There was an indescribable vulnerability in her eyes. She seemed to have remembered something, but she wasn't so sure. She just stared at him. "Tang Yu, Tang Yu." She felt that he was the name engraved in her heart. She was finally sure. He got close to her and did so many things just to remind her of the past. She didn't remember, but she was sure that he was the one she was looking for. This was the reason why she wanted to stay in B City. She wore a bathrobe and sat in front of him. Her long hair spilled all over her body. It was very touching. This gaze was like a promise for a lifetime. But her expression suddenly became painful. She pressed her head with her hand. "It hurts." Tang Yu was shocked. He quickly got out of bed, found some medicine, and fed it to her. After a while, she relaxed and leaned into his arms with a pale face. "Chichi, can I take you to the hospital to see the doctor?" Tang Yu pressed her little head into his arms, feeling a little heartache. It wasn't right to keep taking this medicine. Pei Chichi was afraid of going to the hospital. She shook her head and buried her little face in his arms coquettishly. Her little hands hugged his waist, and she didn't make a sound. He was a little helpless. Xiaoxin's chubby little body hugged Pei Chichi from behind. Her short and fat legs curled around Pei Chichi's waist like a tailless little bear. Her voice was soft and velvety as she said, "Chichi, listen to Daddy." Although the little fellow usually didn't care, she was especially nervous at this time. She pouted and kissed her on the back. "Chichi, listen to Daddy. Xiaoxin isn't afraid of injections." Pei Chichi felt so embarrassed. Tang Yu smiled. He looked at the one in his arms and the other in the back. His gaze was extremely gentle. His fingers pinched Pei Chichi's little face. His voice was a little hoarse. "Look, Xiaoxin isn't afraid. Our Chichi is already so big. She should be even more afraid." His words were full of love. Pei Chichi stayed in his arms. She had a feeling that she didn't want to leave for the rest of her life. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "I'll help you change. Be good and go to the hospital." He had wanted to take her there for a long time. Because her previous illness was treated in America, there had never been an opportunity. Pei Chichi was afraid of pain and wanted to deny it, but Tang Yu had already walked into the changing room and picked out a set of clothes. He helped her put on the clothes carefully, as if he was taking care of her. Pei Chichi's heart softened. No wonder Xiaoxin said that she used to call Tang Yu Daddy. Was the way they interacted in the past really so abnormal? She pursed her lips. Since when did she suspect that this was a place she had stayed in before? Perhaps it was because everything here was to her liking. The decorations, furnishings, everything. Perhaps it was because she could find what she was looking for even with her eyes closed. Even the items in the fridge were exactly the same as her habits. Not to mention that the bathrobe smelled like the brand she was used to, and even the tissue in his car was her favorite brand. Tang Yu knew her a lot better than Anlan. Moreover, there was Xiaoxin. The child looked more like Tang Yu, but there was also some resemblance between his eyes and brows. Chapter 11:25. Xiaoxin followed behind and stared blankly at Papa's princess. In the past, Papa only hugged her, but now it seemed that Papa loved Chichi more. Her eyes were watery. Xiaoxin had fallen out of favor. Tang Yu touched Pei Chichi's head with one hand and said, "Hold her, take a nap in the car." He didn't care whether he spoiled her or not. He just wanted to spoil her so that she couldn't leave him. Pei Chichi's head was indeed a little dizzy, and she fell into a deep sleep in the crook of his arm. Tang Yu put her in the car and looked at Xiaoxin. Take good care of your mother. Xiaoxin nodded with tears in her eyes. Tang Yu knew what his little princess was thinking. He touched her head and chuckled. In the future, we will have our prince to protect us. And her father had to protect her mother. He got in the car, fastened the seatbelt, and drove to Shengyuan Hospital. On the way, he contacted Dr. Yuan and told him that he would go there as soon as he arrived. When the car stopped in the parking lot of the hospital, Pei Chichi woke up. We're at the hospital. Tang Yu unfastened the seatbelt, opened the back door, and held Xiaoxin in one hand and helped Pei Chichi get off the car with the other because she insisted on not being carried. In the bright and clean hall of Shengyuan Hospital, the marble floor was polished. Because it was the weekend, there were many patients. Tang Yu walked to the elevator with Pei Chichi and Xiaoxin, ready to go upstairs to find Dr. Yuan. But he didn't expect to meet Qin Anlan and his family of 3. A family of 3 met a family of 3, and the scene was very subtle. Qin Anlan held Yi Muyun in his arms and walked side by side with Yi Liangqiu to the elevator. Yi Liangqiu was wearing sunglasses and didn't look good. Tang Yu and his family of 3 were standing in the elevator, so they were face to face. The atmosphere was stiff. Especially Qin Anlan and Pei Chichi, who were having sex in marriage, their expressions were very interesting. Ah, you're out? Ah, you're out too? I'm relieved. At this moment, if they said anything more, it would undoubtedly make the situation even more awkward, so neither side made a sound. Pei Chichi sneaked a peek at the little boy. He was good-looking and looked more like Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlan and Tang Yu nodded slightly, but their eyes were locked on Pei Chichi's little face. They asked in a hoarse voice, "What's wrong?" Pei Chichi's voice was also a little hoarse. "I have a headache. Come and take a look." As for why he had a headache, Qin Anlan certainly knew. He glanced at Tang Yu with a reproachful look. For this reason, Tang Yu did not explain. Yi Liangqiu remained silent, as if she had nothing to do with it. However, her son, Yi Muyun, kept staring at Xiaoxin. He looked at that small, soft, and fat little guy. He had never seen such a beautiful little thing. Moreover, she was fat and cute. Her little arms were little by little. She must be delicious. Yi Muyun was a little guy who was almost perversely picky about food. He had no interest in all kinds of food, but now, he finally found something delicious. It was the little heart in front of him. 7-year-old Yi Muyun decided to eat Xiaoxin. His gaze was abnormally fervent. He did not notice the turbulence between adults. Only Xiaoxin saw it, and her eyes were filled with tears. This little brother's gaze was so scary, as if he wanted to eat Xiaoxin. "Xiaoxin, you know the truth." Chapter 11:26. Little Mu Yun slowly struggled out of Qin Anlan's embrace. Xiaoxin didn't want anyone to hug him, and he didn't want an adult to hug him either. His gaze became even more fervent, and Xiaoxin felt a gust of malicious intent. She didn't want to be eaten. As soon as the elevator door opened, Xiaoxin was the first to rush out. The nurse at the elevator door was holding a few hot water bottles in her hands. She was about to enter, and Xiaoxin just happened to bump into. The hot water didn't burn Xiaoxin, but the nurse dodged, and Xiaoxin's body crashed straight into the wall. Tang Yu immediately stretched out his hand to block it, but a small figure was faster and blocked Xiaoxin's way. It was little Mu Yun. However, he was still young after all, and his body was incredibly fragile. Normally, a single touch would leave bruises all over his body. After this collision, blood immediately gushed out from his forehead like a fountain. All of this had to be replenished by Qin Anlan, the mobile blood bank. Xiaoxin was scared silly, and stared blankly at the little brother in front of him who was bleeding like a fountain. Xiaoxin was afraid of blood, and after staring for a while, his fat little body fell down and he fainted. This change was something that the adults didn't expect. Qin Anlan pressed little Mu Yun's forehead, and Tang Yu carried Xiaoxin and said in a low voice, "Go to the emergency room immediately, I'll arrange for a doctor." He didn't like Qin Anlan, but Qin Anlan's son was like that because he wanted to protect Xiaoxin. The child was only a few years old, but he didn't cry or make a fuss. From the bottom of his heart, Tang Yu admired him. The group of people rushed to the emergency room, and a doctor stopped the bleeding for Yi Muyun. However, his body was special, and it only stopped after 5 minutes. During this time, Qin Anlan took another 200 milliliters of blood and gave it to Yi Muyun. Pei Chichi had long forgotten about her headache. She looked at the child and Yi Liangqiu's expression of forbearance. She suddenly felt that it was shameful for her to be Mrs. Qin. His real wife and children were here. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and looked at little Shinshin. Little Shinshin had already revived and was staring at Yi Muyun. Yi Muyun's bleeding stopped, but the doctor said with pity, there might be a scar on his forehead. He paused. But as a boy, appearance isn't the most important thing. Qin Anlan didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, as long as he's fine. From the beginning to the end, there was no communication between the two women because their relationship was too delicate. Pei Chichi felt apologetic, especially when she saw little Mu Yun's strong look. Her eyes turned red like a little rabbit, and she said in a low voice, "Thank you for saving little Shinshin." Yi Muyun sat weakly on the hospital bed. He looked at his mother who was making delicious snacks. Pei Chichi, and then looked at little Shinshin. There was a trace of unfathomable depth in the eyes of this little person. He only smiled lightly and didn't say anything. Such a fat and tender little fellow was like a small steamed bun. If it was damaged, it wouldn't be delicious anymore. Saving her was to preserve the integrity of the food so that it could be eaten in one bite in the future. The adults all thought that Yi Muyun loved his little sister, but they didn't know that he had so many thoughts. Only little Shinshin looked at Yi Muyun with tears in her eyes. This little brother showed an expression that he wanted to eat her up again. So scary. Chapter 11:27. Yi Liangqiu and the doctor were discussing the child's condition. Qin Anlan glanced at Pei Chichi and said, "Let's go out and talk for a while." He led the way out. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu anxiously. Xiaoshan looked at Pei Chichi anxiously. After a while, Tang Yu smiled and reached out to stroke her little head. "Go on. I'll look after the little friend." He was very generous, but this generosity was something he had no choice but to do. Qin Anlan had saved her life. She had feelings for Qin Anlan. He had seen her hugging Qin Anlan's arm with his own eyes. They were like brothers. How could he destroy such a relationship? If he destroyed it, then he would probably be detested in Chichi's heart. He had done a lot for her. Only he could feel the bitterness of it. But he didn't want to make things difficult for his Chichi. He didn't want to at all. Yi Muyun looked up at this uncle. He was clearly unwilling, but he still let his mother go out. Pei Chichi walked out and paused. She saw Qin Anlan at the end of the aisle. He held a cigarette in his hand and looked at her quietly. She walked over slowly. When she was 2 steps away from him, she called out to Anlan. Qin Anlan's gaze was a little indifferent. He rarely looked at her with such an indifferent gaze. After a long while, he said, "You've been with him for the past 2 days?" Pei Chichi nodded her head heavily. She looked up at him and said, "Anlan, let me finish," he interrupted her, his tone a little rough. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. Qin Anlan turned around and looked out of the window, leaving her with a desolate back view. He took 2 deep puffs of his cigarette and said softly, "Chichi, this is my past." She paused for a moment, knowing that he was going to lay his cards on the table. If he hadn't happened to bump into Yi Liangqiu and Yi Muyun today, he probably wouldn't have told her about their existence. Furthermore, he didn't ask about her and Tang Yu, which further proves that her past is Tang Yu and Xiaoshan. "Anlan." She called his name softly. "Why don't you accept her?" His back stiffened, but he didn't speak for a long time. Pei Chichi thought he wouldn't answer, but he slowly turned around and looked at her. "Chichi, if we hadn't been together for the past 2 years, I think I would have decided to marry her because of Mu Yun." With that, he laughed self-deprecatingly. Yi Liangqiu had been clean all these years, probably for this day, but no one would have thought that God would arrange for Pei Chichi to be by his side. With these 2 years, I can't give up. He looked at her with pain in his dark eyes. "Chichi, am I someone you can give up?" His words had trapped her. Pei Chichi hung her head. "Anlan, I'm sorry. You still want to divorce me, don't you? His voice was hoarse and his hand trembled. The cigarette in his hand almost burned himself. Especially since he had just had his blood drawn, he didn't look too good. This kind of Chin Anlan made Pei Chichi's heart ache. After all, he had lived with her for 2 years, and he had been very good to her. During the 2 years when she had lost her memory, he had always taken care of her. In fact, these 2 years could be said to be happy. Even if they were husband and wife in name, he would send her flowers on Valentine's Day, give her gifts on her birthday, and take her skiing on Christmas. Chapter 11:28. How could Chin Anlan not know that he was using the past to force her? He felt that he was a bit pitiful. They were clearly 2 parallel lines, yet he just had to hold her back, not letting her go too far. Chin Anlan chuckled bitterly. Chichi, I'm going back to City B. If you're free, remember to come home. He placed a key in her palm for a long time before saying in a low voice, you know the address. Pei Chichi lifted her eyes and looked at his pained eyes. He turned around and said in a hoarse voice, Chichi, go. Go before I regret it. He didn't agree to the divorce. Instead, he had a negative attitude. He let her be with Tang Yu because he had Yi Liangqiu by his side. Everything had happened too coincidentally. Pei Chichi stood behind him, feeling indescribably sad. It would be a lie to say that she didn't like Chin Anlan at all. It was just that the feelings were too mixed. She was very comfortable with him, just like family. She didn't feel moved. But he was sad, so was she. She went forward gently and hugged him from behind, just like how they hugged each other in New York. She hugged him a little shamelessly. Anlan, don't be angry. His back stiffened. After a while, he smiled bitterly. I'm not angry at you. As he said that, his voice became even lower. I'm angry at myself. Chichi, if I hadn't been so ridiculous in the past, I wouldn't have let go of you. I definitely wouldn't. After Pei Chichi left, Kaim appeared behind Chin Anlan silently. President Chin. Chin Anlan's eyes were a little red when he turned around. Did you get it? Kaim looked at President Chin's expression and didn't dare to say anything. He silently handed over a paper bag and left. Chin Anlan lowered his head and looked at the thing. After a long time, he untied the string one by one. Opening the file, there were dozens of photos inside, each of which was of Tang Yu and Pei Chichi. There were scenes of them celebrating their birthday in a bar, at a movie theater, kissing in a public phone booth. The scenes were very intense. There was also the scene of Tang Yu carrying Pei Chichi home in the middle of the night. Chin Anlan's eyes were a little red, and even his hands were shaking. After a while, he took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and took a long drag. He raised his head to prevent the heat from filling his eyes. Behind him, Yi Liangqiu stood there. She silently watched this man, watching him grieve over another woman. She slowly said, Mu Yun might need another 200 milliliters of blood. Her voice was cold-blooded and heartless, as if he was a blood bank. Chin Anlan suddenly turned around and stared at her. Yi Liangqiu's gaze also fell on the paper bag in his hand. She knew that it was Kaim who had given it to him, but Chin Anlan didn't know that Kaim had betrayed him and had already been used by Tang Yu. Chin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu and asked, in your heart, I'm just a moving blood bank, right? Sometimes, he suspected that this woman was cold-blooded. If she loved him, as she appeared to love him, then why was she so calm when she took his blood? Yi Liangqiu's voice was very calm as she said, yes. Chin Anlan sneered. Yi Liangqiu, why did you tell me about Mu Yun's existence at this time? Don't tell me that you didn't make a deal with Tang Yu. The deal is on that day, she said bluntly. She had always dared to say it. Chapter 11:29. In the face of his questioning, Yi Liangqiu was still unmoved. She was very calm. Because I want to give Mu Yun the best. Your blood is the best for him. Chin Anlan couldn't deny it. However, he had an urge to strangle the woman in front of him. Yi Liangqiu's tone was indifferent. Mu Yun is waiting. She was the first to leave, but Chin Anlan held her back. Yi Liangqiu turned around. Chin Anlan was looking at her with a burning gaze. His gaze was definitely not kind, and before she could analyze the meaning behind his gaze, her body was pressed against the wall. Then, her lips were kissed, fiercely. She widened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. He was kissing her. Just when Pei Chichi had just left. However, she soon found out that he wasn't kissing her, but punishing her. He bit her lips and abused her little mouth, biting her until it was swollen and painful. It was definitely uncomfortable, and there wasn't even a trace of pleasure. She struggled for a while, but in return, she was even more ferocious. Her body was almost crushed against the wall, and her ribs were aching as though they were about to break. His thin lips were hot against the side of her neck, and he bit down on it as a punishment. Yi Liangqiu let out a low cry, and her beautiful eyes opened, and were stained with a tinge of pain. Yi Liangqiu, do you also know pain? Qin Anlan tasted a metallic taste. That was her blood. He moved his face up and stuck it against her face. Their eyes were locked, and his voice was incomparably cold. Yi Liangqiu, I thought you weren't afraid of pain and didn't feel anything. It turns out that you can also feel pain. As he said that, he suddenly let go of her and licked the blood at the side of his lips. He looked at her coldly and kept retreating. In the end, she was left alone. Yi Liangqiu put her hands behind her back and pressed them against the wall. It was not easy for her to support her body. She looked at his back and reached out to touch the wound on her neck. He said he thought she wouldn't feel any pain. How could she not feel pain? That 19-year-old girl was called into his office and opened in such a shameful way. How could it not hurt? When she was pregnant, she didn't dare tell him because he said that she was a rising star of King Entertainment. If she told him that she was pregnant, he would definitely make her abort the child. What he wanted was a commodity, not her as a person, much less her child. At that time, she endured great pain, completed one work after another, she will pain. Later, she went into hiding and gave birth to the child. In that small hospital, she used all her strength to give birth to Mu Yun. That heart-wrenching love, if it wasn't pain, then what was it? At that time, she was not even 20 years old. She gave birth to a child for a man who didn't love her and treated her like a commodity. Now, he said she didn't know pain? Qin Anlan, it's not that I don't feel pain, it's that I'm numb to it. It's so painful that I want to give up. She walked into the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. In the mirror, she was extremely pale, but there was a bright red bite mark on her neck. It was very warm. Yi Liangqiu gently stroked it and smiled. Who would have thought that this was a kiss filled with hatred? When she returned, Mu Yun had already undergone a blood transfusion and was lying quietly asleep. Qin Anlan's palm gently stroked Mu Yun's little face. His expression was very gentle, not at all like the coldness he showed to her. Yi Liangqiu laughed softly. She laughed at herself and also laughed at Qin Anlan. If he didn't love her deeply, why did he force himself on her? Did she scheme against him, or did he mislead her? She couldn't tell. Chapter 11:30. After this incident, Pei Chichi's headache magically stopped. She went to Dr. Yuan's office and saw that Tang Yu was talking to Dr. Yuan. There was a stack of medical records in his hands. She glanced at it and realized that it was hers. Later on, Tang Yu asked her to take Xiaoshan out to play while he talked to Dr. Yuan. Although they were in the hospital, the two men were much more casual when they were behind closed doors. Tang Yu and Dr. Yuan each smoked a cigarette. After a long time, Dr. Yuan asked bitterly, "How is Chongshan recently?" Tang Yu held the cigarette and glanced at Dr. Yuan silently. Then he said slowly, "Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. When he's good, he's quite normal. But when he's bad, he can't recognize anyone. Mrs. Shen's eyes are damaged." Dr. Yuan sighed. Originally, Chongshan wouldn't have a problem so soon. It wouldn't be a problem for him to endure for another 5 or 10 years. But after being provoked by Shen Lian 2 years ago, he was not doing well anymore. Dr. Yuan's voice was heavy. "Where's Shen Lian?" "She's in the sanatorium. Someone is watching her," Tang Yu said calmly. But Dr. Yuan knew that it was not the case. Shen Lian's cranial nerves weren't too badly damaged and could be treated. However, Tang Yu didn't let her go to jail. Instead, he locked her up in the sanatorium. There, it was even darker than being in jail. There were 4 people watching over Shun Lian all day long. Shun Lian's hands and feet were tied up every day. She was in a clear mind and suffered a lot. But this was the price she had to pay. Although Dr. Yuan felt that it was too cruel, she was not crazy. But the demons in her heart were too deep. Dr. Yuan let out a long sigh. I didn't expect that Chongshan's happy life would end up like this. Tang Yu looked at the cigarette between his fingers. After a while, he said softly, fortunately, someone is always with him. Dr. Yuan understood and sent him out. Before they parted, he looked at Tang Yu. Maybe it's a blessing that Chichi will never remember. Tang Yu nodded. Dr. Yuan smiled. Take good care of her. She is Chongshan's only child. He wanted to say something, but Tang Yu knew what he wanted to say. He paused for a moment. I'll help Chichi manage the company, but she's like a child now. Let's play for a few more years. In fact, Tang Yu didn't want Pei Chichi to work so hard. Chichi was talented, but she had always been unwilling to manage a company. He didn't want to make things difficult for her. Dr. Yuan nodded dejectedly. This was Chongshan's last wish, but Tang Yu couldn't bear to part with Pei Chichi and wanted to protect her. There was nothing wrong with that. Tang Yu slowly went downstairs and sat in the car. Behind him, an adult and a child were lying on their stomachs, looking at him. It was obvious that they had waited long enough. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu. Are you all right? What could possibly happen? Tang Yu smiled and caressed her little face. Pei Chichi let out a cry and hugged his arm. I'll come over tomorrow. I heard from the nurse that Yi Muyun is going to be hospitalized. Tang Yu buckled his seatbelt and said, That's good. Bring Xiaoxin with you. What about you? She didn't know that her voice was full of dependence. Although she said she couldn't remember, Tang Yu was very important to her. He was so important that he was the closest person to her. Maybe she hadn't forgotten about him at all. Tang Yu smiled. I really have to go on a business trip tomorrow. Chapter 1131. Tang Yu's breathing became erratic. Feeling her embrace, it was as if he had returned to the past. After a while, he patted her hand and said in a hoarse voice, All right, Chichi, stop fooling around. Otherwise, Xiaoxin will laugh at you. She said very seriously, Don't call Xiaoxin mommy. I want to be an older sister. Xiaoxin cried out older sister at the side. Tang Yu turned the steering wheel and said meaningfully, Then Chichi, you have to call me daddy too. After returning home, when Xiaoxin was asleep, he pressed down on the little girl and kissed her in the bathroom. It was so sticky that she could not get enough of it. She could also feel his excitement. Pei Chichi's body was as soft as water. If he had not held her up, she would have fallen. She had always desired his body. Now that she was being kissed like this, she could not take it anymore. Her little hand hung around his neck and her little mouth moved closer for him to kiss. Her lips were slightly red and swollen, but why was he still kissing her after kissing her? The little girl was a little dissatisfied and rubbed against him. Tang Yu lowered his head and nibbled on her ear. You want me to kiss you there? Pei Chichi looked up. Her watery eyes were filled with unquestionable desire. She remembered that when he kissed her in the pavilion, the humidity mixed with the rain, the dazzling sky. She shook her head and nodded, looking at him pitifully like a puppy. Tang Yu nibbled on her little neck. Beg me. Chichi. Call me daddy. Pervert. Her little foot kicked at him, but he caught it in his hand and did something indescribable. These were all beyond Pei Chichi's imagination. She felt that her little foot was about to catch fire. Tang Yu kissed her and murmured, Chichi. She bit her little mouth and looked up at his charming and handsome face. She bit him again and said in a low voice, You pervert. He scooped her up and lifted her up. Then, under her gaze, he kissed her passionately. She couldn't help but let out a cry, her small hands clutching his arm tightly. Her body felt like it was being thrown into the sky. She didn't know where she touched, but the water in the bathroom floated down, cooling the hot temperature. Her head was dizzy, but she still had a trace of rationality. He had the intention to torture her. Moreover, this place was warmer and 100 times more convenient than the little pavilion. But in the end, he did not really give it to her. Just like that, Pei Chichi was already on the verge of death. She deeply felt the profoundness of this knowledge. When it was over, she lay in the bathtub with him. She lay in his arms like a little animal and nibbled. After witnessing a certain man's shameless act, Pei Chichi's worldview was completely destroyed. What nobility, what abstinence, they were all lies. Looking at the expression on his face when he was enjoying it, it was especially. She never knew that when a man was aroused, his panting could be so pleasant. Just hearing it made her blood boil. She lay on her stomach and grabbed him with her little hand. Tang Yu, you can't be, that you can't do it, right? How could a normal man be able to endure it? She had just finished speaking when she moaned. Because Tang Yu looked at the little girl in his arms who was seeking death. His fingers gently touched her slightly swollen little mouth. His tone was very gentle. Chichi, do you really want to know if I can do it? Chapter 1132. She bit him with her mouth. No more, no more. Tang Yu smiled and laid back down to calm himself down. This was considered letting her off the hook. After a while, the little person bravely crawled over and whispered "Daddy" in his ear. This sound almost drove Tang Yu crazy. Although he had tortured her several times, he still managed to hold the last line of defense. Pei Chichi bit her lip, lay on the bed and sighed. What was he waiting for? What was the difference between what they were doing and what they were really doing? Pei Chichi was thinking about morality, while Tang Yu was thinking about strategy. Right now, Pei Chichi was like a kitten that couldn't be tamed. She longed for him and liked Xiaoshan, but it was not enough, because she still had Anlan in her heart. She could not do it without hesitation, so Tang Yu would rather keep her hanging. It was like a piece of meat. She had tasted the juice on the outside and smelled the smell, but she would not be able to take a bite, so she would keep thinking about it. Tang Yu accompanied them for a day, got out of bed early the next morning and got dressed. Pei Chichi woke up, wrapped in the quilt and looked at him. You're leaving so early? Tang Yu did not stop his hands, bent down slightly and kissed her. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. He did not immediately leave her lips, but kissed her for a long time, then murmured, after seeing Yi Muyun today, we'll eat out for lunch. I'll ask Lao Jiao to pick up Xiaoshan in the afternoon. Pei Chichi was a little worried. Will she be okay if you're not at home? Tang Yu chuckled, then said, Lao Jiao will send her to my mother's. He paused. Chichi, how about I give you the address and you send her there, huh? I don't want to, she cried softly, her little face blushing. Tang Yu pinched her little face. You've known my mother for 5 years, yet you're still so shy. He did not force her and left after giving her some instructions. Finally, he paused and said, Xiaoxin's teacher has been chosen. He's 35 years old. Don't worry, I'm not worried. She hung from him and let him carry her to the locker room, where his suitcase was. Tang Yu put her down and kissed her. Be good at home, okay? She looked at him reluctantly. Finally, she made another move and sat on his suitcase. Tang Yu watched helplessly. She clung onto him like a cat and stared at him. When I wasn't here, did you have anyone else? Tang Yu's gaze was a little deep. He walked over and carried her up, pressing her down on the sofa. She was a little excited, her little claws scratching around. He smiled and held her down. If I did, I wouldn't be like this, he said 2 words in a low voice, thirst. Then you can still bear it. The little girl in his arms bit her lip and looked at him with seductive eyes. Tang Yu let out a heavy breath. Chichi, are you sure you want to tease me like this? He had endured for 2 years. If he really did something to her, it would be very rough, and she might not be able to bear it. Pei Chichi howled and did not say anything else. She only touched him gently, feeling a little reluctant to let him go. How could Tang Yu not know that? He kissed her little mouth. Be good. Come back after the matter is resolved. She understood what he meant and blushed. He said it as if she really wanted to. Chapter 1133. Pei Chichi was caught up in his prank. She ignored him and buried her little face in the sofa. Tang Yu patted her little butt and left with his luggage. As soon as he left, Pei Chichi felt quite lonely. She slowly sat up straight and hugged herself. She was a little hesitant, but after a while, she became clear-headed again. If it wasn't for his deep love, why would he endure it? After Xiaoshen woke up, she made delicious tomato and egg noodles for Xiaoshen and fed the little fellow until it was full. Then, they went for a walk in the small park and bought a beautiful fruit basket from the nearest shop to take them to the hospital. Qin Anlan wasn't there, and only Yi Liangqiu accompanied Yi Muyun. The atmosphere was a little uncomfortable, but it was much better than Qin Anlan's presence. Xiaoshen was inexplicably afraid of Yi Muyun, because her little brother's gaze seemed to want to eat Xiaoshen up. Yi Liangqiu greeted them very indifferently, and even specially ordered a dessert that little girls liked to eat for Xiaoshen. Pei Chichi looked at the Empress Yi. The Empress Yi, who could only be seen on the big screen, appeared in front of her so closely. She wasn't as cold as frost, at least she was gentle to little girls like Xiaoshen. Yi Liangqiu looked at Xiaoshen, who was sitting there obediently, with a touch of warmth in her eyes. I've always wanted a daughter, but it might not be possible in this lifetime. Because Qin Anlan wouldn't give her another chance. That day, he had crazily done it with her 5 times, and each time, he didn't really give it to her. She couldn't get pregnant. Of course, in this situation, she wouldn't deliberately want a child to tie him down. It was enough to be stupid once. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and didn't know what to say. Yi Liangqiu seemed to want to say something to her. Sure enough, Yi Liangqiu opened her mouth and said softly, "Can we have a chat at the door?" Pei Chichi looked at Xiaoshen, then at the Empress Yi, and hesitated for a moment before nodding. However, she was still willing to stand at the door, unwilling to leave Xiaoshen, afraid that something might happen. However, Xiaoshen was about to cry, because little older brother's eyes suddenly became especially bright, and he wanted to eat Xiaoshen again. The only thing missing was a knife and fork in his hand. Xiaoshen pouted and cried softly, "Xiaoshen, it doesn't taste good." His voice was soft, afraid that the adults outside would hear him. Yi Muyun looked at the crying little bun. Originally, he hated little girls crying the most, but at this moment, he felt that this little bun crying was quite interesting. Therefore, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He was quite happy. This was extremely rare for Yi Muyun. It was rare for him to be this happy. Most of the time, he was so calm that he didn't seem like a 7-year-old child. Xiaoshen was the first toy in his life. Delicious and fun. When you grow up, you'll be even more delicious and fun. As the door was closed, Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. Xiaoshen is very cute. Just as Pei Chichi was about to speak, she saw the hickey on Yi Liangqiu's neck. It looked quite forceful and intense, and she was sure that it wasn't there yesterday. Yi Liangqiu also felt her gaze, which was like that of a little wolf puppy. She reached out and touched it. Pei Chichi, there are many types of kisses, and this is a punishment, her voice lowered, as if she was melancholy. A punishment for giving him a disgraceful past. Chapter 1134. Because of Mu Yun's existence, his situation had also become difficult to deal with. She thought to herself, he must hate me. If he hates me, then so be it. If he doesn't love me, then hate me. Suddenly, Pei Chichi felt a little sad and troubled. She wanted to divorce Anlan so that they could be together. But Anlan did not agree to it. She could not bear to be so cruel to him. After a long time, she said softly, "I'll talk to Anlan." Yi Liangqiu, you're not in the wrong. What was in the wrong was fate. Just like her and Tang Yu, they had missed each other. After Pei Chichi said that, she smiled gently at Yi Liangqiu. Her smile was sincere, without any pretense. Yi Liangqiu seemed to have fallen for Pei Chichi at that moment. Perhaps, that was how Qin Anlan liked her as well. Pei Chichi coughed out gently before saying, "The truth is, we can be really good friends. But the prerequisite is that you're willing to give me your autograph." "Yeah, I'm your loyal fan." She leaned closer to Yi Liangqiu. "There's nothing going on between me and Anlan." She blinked her eyes again before her gaze landed on Yi Liangqiu's neck. The teasing look in her eyes was extremely obvious. Yi Liangqiu was stunned for a moment. She had not expected this to be the case. Given Qin Anlan's beastly nature, how could there be nothing going on between him and Pei Chichi? Perhaps because she was feeling uneasy, Yi Liangqiu said softly, "Tomorrow's interview as usual." Pei Chichi looked in the direction of the door. "What about Mu Yun?" "I'll find someone to take care of him," Yi Liangqiu said. She seemed to have triggered something and didn't say anything else. Pei Chichi could feel that Yi Liangqiu was keeping a distance from her. She could understand. After all, their relationship was delicate. If they were too close, Yi Liangqiu would feel uncomfortable, especially during her marriage with Anlan. At this moment, Pei Chichi felt that she must immediately dissolve the marriage with Qin Anlan, not for Yi Liangqiu, but for Anlan. She had a feeling that Yi Liangqiu loved Qin Anlan deeply. Yi Liangqiu pushed open the door to the ward and looked at her son in surprise. His eyes were shining as he looked at Pei Chichi's little heart with a fervent gaze. This was something that had never happened before. Mu Yun did not pay much attention to little girls. On the other hand, Xiaoxin was about to cry. She stopped eating the dessert and looked at Yi Mu Yun warily. "Xiaoxin, don't be eaten." When she saw Pei Chichi, Xiaoxin pounced on her and buried her face in Pei Chichi's arms. She whimpered, "Xiaoxin, don't be eaten." The smile on Yi Mu Yun's face became more obvious. This little bun was not stupid. She actually knew that he wanted to eat her. Since she was called Xiaoxin, then he would eat Xiaoxin. Where should he start? Her eyes were very black and beautiful. Her little nose was straight and her little mouth was red and moist like jelly. She must be delicious. His gaze was fervent, and Xiaoxin cried even more miserably. She howled, "He wants to eat Xiaoxin." Pei Chichi smiled and hugged the little girl in her arms. At this moment, Xiaoxin's dependence on him was so obvious. If they were not related by blood, how could she be like this? Her heart softened a little. She hugged the little girl in her arms and comforted, "How can that be? Brother Mu Yun won't eat Xiaoxin. If she is willing." Yi Mu Yun said softly and in a very gentlemanly tone, "I will eat her if she agrees." Pei Chichi was stunned. Yi Liangqiu was also stunned. How old was he? He already knew how to flirt with girls. Moreover, Mu Yun did not know what it meant to eat her, right? Chapter 1135. At this moment, Yi Mu Yun got down from the bed and slowly walked to Xiaoxin's side. He lowered his head and gently nibbled on Xiaoxin's little nose. He was extremely daring. Pei Chichi was still there. Xiaoxin was scared to tears. Was little big brother eating her? Does it hurt? Yi Mu Yun's voice was very low. "If it hurts, I won't eat you." Xiaoxin shook her head, her face blank. Was that considered eating just now? It didn't seem to hurt. Yi Mu Yun pursed his lips and reminisced for a while. Then, his expression was a little indifferent. Milk buns. The taste of milk buns. He didn't like sweets, but from now on, he would like them. Xiaoxin's milky yellow tasted hot. Xiaoxin's eyes were filled with cat pee and tears. She looked really cute. Yi Mu Yun kissed her little face again. "Baby, don't cry. I won't eat you anymore." Even if he wanted to eat her, he would wait until she grew up. Xiaoxin forgot to cry and just looked at him. She felt that this little big brother looked really good when he smiled. Xiaoxin twitched and held back her tears. Her voice was very soft. "Little big brother, can I eat you too?" Xiaoxin suddenly felt that little big brother looked very tasty. She mimicked Yi Mu Yun and nibbled on his straight nose. As she nibbled, she was worried that he would bite back. That careful look of hers was really cute. Yi Mu Yun smiled lightly and Xiaoxin forgot to cry. Pei Chichi and Yi Liangqiu were stunned. This child's marriage was decided just like that. The adults' matters had not been resolved yet, and this child's matter was already decided. This world was a mess and a fantasy. Yi Liangqiu was also a little helpless. Mu Yun was quite serious. Thinking of the future, Pei Chichi took her leave. Since her little heart didn't understand, it was better. to pretend that she didn't know. Yi Muyun would probably forget it when he grew up. After all, he was still young. But when she thought of Yi Muyun's expression at that time, she sighed in her heart. It wasn't that simple. Yi Muyun's eyes were especially firm. He didn't look like a 7-year-old at all. Pei Chichi drove Xiaoshan to the city for dinner and specially brought her to eat desserts. She was actually a little reluctant to send her away, but she had to go to work tomorrow and couldn't take care of her. Fortunately, Tang Yu would be back the day after tomorrow. Pei Chichi suddenly stopped. What was she thinking? She didn't want him to come back earlier. Xiaoshan happily dug into the ice cream, and then secretly peeked at Pei Chichi, her small mouth full. Chichi, are you thinking of Daddy? I'm not. Pei Chichi lightly snorted. In order to punish her, she dug a big piece out of Xiaoxin's little cup. Xiaoshan looked at the empty cup and was stunned for a moment. After a while, Xiaoshan said pitifully, I saw Daddy kissing you and fighting with your vixen. Xiaoxin's voice wasn't soft, and everyone around them looked at Pei Chichi. It would have been fine if she had called her mommy. When a child said it, an adult would at most laugh, but Xiaoshan was calling Chichi. Moreover, Pei Chichi looked quite young. Was that the little vixen of the child's daddy? Pei Chichi naturally also noticed that the surrounding gazes were a little strange. She coughed lightly. Xiaoshan, you can't talk about daddy and mommy outside. Does Chichi want to be Xiaoxin's mommy? Xiaoxin's narrow-mindedness was very playful. Chapter 1136. At this time, a waiter came over and put the dessert in front of Pei Chichi. He snorted at Pei Chichi to show his disdain. Another shameless little vixen who climbed into the bed of her male master. Pei Chichi was stunned and stared at Xiaoshan. Xiaoshan burst into tears. Xiaoshan doesn't want someone else to be her mother. Act with all your might, act with all your might. The surrounding gazes became more and more accusatory. Pei Chichi was really a little angry. She picked up Xiaoshan, paid the bill and left. Xiaoshan was carried away while looking at the dessert on the table reluctantly and cried even louder. Pei Chichi carried the little girl to the car and put her in the children's chair. Xiaoshan looked at her. Chichi. Pei Chichi ignored her and walked to the driver's seat. She buckled the seat belt and drove straight back to Xia City. On the way, Xiaoshan peed secretly from time to time but did not dare to make a sound. Pei Chichi was really angry. Xiaoshan was very smart, but a child should not play such a joke with an adult. She ignored her until Xiaoshan really cried. Pei Chichi ignored her even though she cried. When they arrived at Xia City, Pei Chichi carried Xiaoshan in her arms gently but did not talk to her. Xiaoshan wiped her tears. Chichi, you are being cold-blooded. Then what you did in the dessert shop just now is called verbal violence, Tang Share. Pei Chichi was angry. She did not want Xiaoshan to embarrass others with her cleverness. Moreover, she was a little sad. For Xiaoshan to say this, could it be that in her heart, she was not her mother? After all, they had been separated for so long and Xiaoshan did not remember her, so Xiaoshan did not think of her as her mother. She was sad, but she did not know who to talk to. After returning home, she had a faint headache. Xiaoshan saw that Chichi did not say anything and was even sadder. But seeing that Chichi was not feeling well, little Fatty ran to the bathroom with a small cup of water and sprinkled water on Pei Chichi's forehead. Then she looked at Pei Chichi. Xiaoshan was scared. She was afraid that she made Chichi angry and Chichi would ignore her in the future. Her big round eyes were filled with tears as she looked at Pei Chichi pitifully. Pei Chichi was sprayed with cold water. When she opened her eyes, she saw Xiaoxin's pouting eyes. Her heart was sour and sweet at the same time. She reached out to hug Xiaoshan. I'm fine. Xiaoshan wanted to cry, but she held it in. Her voice sounded pitiful. Mama is fine. She corrected her seriously. Pei Chichi could not help but laugh. She knew that the little fellow actually cared about it, but she did not immediately comfort him. Instead, she remained indifferent. Sure enough, Xiaoxin's heart was always in a gloomy mood until she left Xia City. Lao Jiao teased her in the car for a long time without saying anything. Later, when they went to Lin Yun's place, he told her about it. Lin Yun asked him to go back first and she would comfort Xiaoshan. After all, Lin Yun had been Xiaoxin's mother for 2 years. She knew Xiaoxin's temper very well. She knew that she had a quarrel with Pei Chichi. She could not help but laugh. This mother and daughter were quarreling like sisters. It was all Tang Yu's fault. He did not want his wife to be his wife and raised her like a daughter. Therefore, his wife was delicate and Xiaoxin was even more delicate. Chapter 1137. Lin Yun found it funny. What's going on? Our Xiaoxin is so cute. How could she ignore her? Xiaoxin twitched and finally said, I said that Chichi isn't my mother, so Chichi got angry. Lin Yun thought that Xiaoxin must have hurt Pei Chichi's heart. Otherwise, why would an adult argue with a child? But she was a grandmother and Xiaoxin had always been her big sister. How could she bear to scold her granddaughter? She coaxed her, then let Daddy talk to Mommy. Mommy will forgive Xiaoxin. Xiaoxin was in Lin Yun's arms and peeked at her grandmother's face. Grandma was still loving. Xiaoxin twitched again and cried until her face was a mess. She looked like a little cat. That night, Lin Yun called Tang Yu to tell him about it. The mother and son chatted and found it funny. Lin Yun hadn't seen Chichi yet, so she couldn't help scolding Tang Yu. Aren't you living together? Why do you want Xiaoxin to call you sister? Tang Yu heard his mother's words and his heart softened. He smiled and said, Mom, Chichi. Although it was a little difficult to talk about it, Tang Yu and his mother had almost nothing to hide. Chichi has lost her memory for the past 2 years and her personality has changed a lot. She's not as mature as she was when we met when she was 20. Lin Yun thought about the 20-year-old Pei Chichi and then thought about how she wasn't even 20. She was stunned. If that was the case, didn't that mean that she had 2 granddaughters? Lin Yun coughed lightly. Tang Yu, it's been hard on you. Tang Yu smiled and said, Yes, Mom. I'll coax her later. Lin Yun laughed and scolded, You're the only one who treats her like this. Tang Yu didn't care about others. Tang Yu was going to hang up. Hearing his mother's words, he sighed helplessly. Mom, fortunately, there is only one Pei Chichi in the world. Lin Yun was fed a mouthful of dog food by her son. When she looked up, she saw Zhao Yi walk out of the bathroom wearing only a bathrobe. As soon as he walked over, he turned off the bedside lamp. The bedroom was dark. This was a habit that Zhao Yi would only have if he wanted to live as a couple. Sure enough, Zhao Yi came over and hugged Lin Yun from behind. His voice was a little hoarse. Are you done? He grabbed the phone and chatted casually with Tang Yu. The last thing he said was, Tang Yu, Yun Yun and I are going to bed. See you the day after tomorrow. Zhao Yi was still the vice president of Boyi and had a high position of power. It was very natural for him to talk about such a personal topic. Tang Yu felt like he was being fed dog food, while Lin Yun was extremely embarrassed. She pushed Zhao Yi away and snatched the phone. Tang Yu, if you have something to say, continue. Your Uncle Zhao drank too much. I drank too much. Zhao Yi smiled and sat up from the bed. He hugged his wife's delicate body from behind and kissed her neck. His voice was a little seductive. When you're drunk, you can't do anything too excessive, right? Lin Yun closed her eyes. Zhao Yi. The phone was not hung up. If he did this, Tang Yu would know. Do you want us to continue after hanging up, or do you want Tang Yu to listen? Zhao Yi was usually serious, but now he was especially shameless. Lin Yun closed her eyes and touched the phone on the bed. She picked it up and looked at it. Sure enough, Tang Yu did not hang up. Lin Yun was cursing in her heart. She also thought that men were all bad things. Chapter 1138. Lin Yun hung up the phone. She wanted to grab the man on top of her, but how could Zhao Yi let her go so easily? He had only eaten meat once this week. He pressed her down from behind and kissed her neck. His voice was low and husky. Yun Yun, come from behind. He liked to look at his wife's exquisite figure. He liked to stick to her back, stick his face to her face, and watch her aroused look. Moreover, he knew that she liked it too. On the other side, Tang Yu was in his early 30s. He was having a lively sex education class. He hung up the phone and smiled. In his heart, he thought that Uncle Zhao had just gotten married at an old age. It was understandable that he was not restrained in that aspect. Especially once, when Zhao Yi had a meal with him and drank too much, he complained to him that his Yun Yun was obsessed with Buddhist scriptures and not his body. Tang Yu remembered that Zhao Yi often talked about Buddhist scriptures with his mother for more than 10 years. So it was all a fake hobby. It turned out that all men were the same. At this moment, Tang Yu smiled and called Pei Chichi. Xiaoshen was crying so sadly. That silly girl must be very angry. Although he had considered Lin Yun's words and felt that it was inappropriate to raise Chichi as a daughter, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was better to raise her as a daughter. He called her number. She picked up quickly, but her voice was a little soft. She must have been crying. Tang Yu's heart was sour and sweet at the same time. Are you angry with Xiaoshen? On the other side, Pei Chichi snorted softly. How did you know? Tang Yu smiled. Mom said it. Mom said that it's not good for me to raise you as a daughter. Pei Chichi said in a muffled voice, you're a pervert. He smiled. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in City A, he missed her a little. His voice became deeper. Chichi, I miss you very much. Instead of comforting her, he said that he missed her. From Tang Yu's point of view, the conflict between Pei Chichi and Xiaoshen was not a conflict at all, instead it was somewhat funny. But even though Chichi was raised to be spoiled by him, she was still an adult and would only get angry if Xiaoshen did not do well. Just take it as their breaking-in period. Little girls would always play around when they were together. Pei Chichi asked him gloomily, are you coming back the day after tomorrow? He replied casually and then asked softly, did you miss me? Actually, she wanted to, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Tang Yu looked at the dark night and listened to her shallow breathing. He smiled. Chichi, sleep early. She gave an "oh," but in her heart, she was thinking, that's it. But that was it. He said goodnight and waited for her to hang up. Pei Chichi was a little disappointed, but she still hung up the phone obediently. For a long time, Pei Chichi lay on the bed, unable to fall asleep. She took out her cell phone. Should she call him or not? In the end, she still dialed his number. Tang Yu just responded with a millimeter and she quickly said, I miss you too. After saying that, she quickly hung up. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, then he smiled. His Chichi would always be the cutest girl in his life. This time, it was his turn to be unable to sleep. He felt that he had an inexhaustible amount of energy, so he went to the gym attached to the suite and vented his excess energy. But how could he endure it after not having done it for 2 years? He really couldn't take it anymore and went to the bathroom to relieve himself. Chapter 1139. Early the next morning, Pei Chichi wondered if Xiaoshen was still unhappy, so she picked up Tang Yu's number and called her. It was Lin Yun who answered. Her tone was a little funny, and she talked a lot with Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi felt a little embarrassed because she was at odds with a child, and the child was her own daughter. But she also knew that it was because of her memory loss that caused the relationship between her and Xiaoshen to be different from a normal mother-daughter relationship. She wasn't really angry, but she wanted to correct Xiaoshen's bad behavior. The child was too smart, and it was not good for her to be harmed. However, children were very forgetful. When Xiaoshen talked to her, she had long forgotten about yesterday's incident. Pei Chichi let out a sigh of relief. Actually, Xiaoshen thought that her daddy would agree to spank Chichi's little butt when she came back. But her daddy also said that he would spank her little butt. Xiaoshen felt that it was fair, so she was happy. But Xiaoshen didn't tell Chichi about this, because Xiaoshen had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. After getting Xiaoshen's forgiveness, Pei Chichi felt like it was windy when she walked to work. First, she went to the magazine office to prepare the information for the interview with Yi Liangqiu. Then, she carried her camera and was just about to go out when she bumped into Pei Huan. Pei Huan was now like the lady boss of Beauty magazine. In the past, she always came to look for Laro Khan, but this time, it was obviously not the case. She came to look for Pei Chichi, and she even brought someone with her, Xiaomai. How can you go alone? Pei Huan looked at Pei Chichi and rolled her eyes. Do you know how famous Yi Liangqiu is? Pei Chichi gave her a dumbfounded look. Pei Huan waved her hand. Forget it. Let me tell you, you idiot. Yi Liangqiu needs to bring 4 makeup artists, 8 bodyguards, and a manager to record a show. If you go alone, it would be a wonder if you don't get eaten up, little bunny. Pei Chichi didn't understand. Did you know? You have to be a little more grandiose in order for her to feel valued. Otherwise, even if you go, it'll be a waste. She won't go one-on-one with you. She'll enjoy being the center of attention, understand? Pei Huan spoke until her saliva was dry. She picked up a cup of fruit tea that Pei Chichi had placed on the table and gulped it down. Pei Chichi was still dumbfounded as she looked at Pei Huan. After Pei Huan finished drinking, he began to get down to business. He beckoned for a few employees and little Mai to gather 8 people. Empress Yi will be satisfied with this arrangement, understand? Pei Chichi nodded and then asked Pei Huan, you don't seem to like her? Pei Huan's neck and eyes were straight. She looked at Pei Chichi for a long time before she sneered. Pei Chichi, among the female stars in the entertainment industry, there aren't many who can compare to Yi Liangqiu. Pei Chichi thought of the cold and cheerless Yi Liangqiu. She didn't seem to be as formidable as Pei Huan made her out to be. Little 7, you idiot. She can climb to this point, give birth to a dragon child, and is still being supported. If she doesn't have some tricks up her sleeve, do you think Qin Anlan won't strangle her to death? Pei Huan knew King Entertainment well, and she knew Qin Anlan even better. Yi Liangqiu wasn't an ordinary woman. If an ordinary woman went to attack Qin, she would have died on the way. Even that Shen Lian. Didn't Qin Anlan like her to death in the past? Didn't he fall out with her later? Chapter 1140. As Pei Huan spoke, Pei Chichi nodded her head in a silly manner. In the end, the 8 of them went together. However, when they arrived at the reception room of King Entertainment, Amy and the others were stopped outside. Yi Liangqiu's bodyguard said expressionlessly, Miss Yi only wants to see Miss Pei alone. The rest of you can wait outside for a while. If Pei Huan was here, Pei Chichi really wanted to tell her that this was what it meant to be pretentious. She turned around and gestured for Amy and the others to wait in the conference room while she pushed the door open and entered alone. Unexpectedly, only Yi Liangqiu and her agent were inside. After seeing Pei Chichi, the agent even smiled and left to give them enough space. I want to interview you alone. Do you mind? Yi Liangqiu's voice was very calm. And the questions will be written by us. Previously, Pei Huan had said that Yi Liangqiu was strong and powerful, but Pei Chichi didn't quite believe it. Because the Yi Liangqiu she had come into contact with was a mother, gentle and easygoing, and the Yi Liangqiu in front of her was her real self. Pei Chichi sat down and took out her own manuscript and placed it on the table. She took Yi Liangqiu's manuscript and flipped through it. Her voice was very calm. This depends on whether our magazine is able to publish this interview with Miss Yi. She was almost sure that this interview wasn't simple. It might even be a little forceful. And the target was her marriage with Qin Anlan. She had no problem with it. Everything depended on Anlan. If Anlan wanted to, she could get a divorce immediately. However, she felt that Yi Liangqiu's actions would backfire and not be a smart move. She read a few lines at a time and looked up at Yi Liangqiu. Are you sure? Anlan isn't one to be threatened. All the answers to this question were written by Yi Liangqiu's side. The content was quite explosive. It was as if they were betting on Yi Liangqiu's halo. If Qin Anlan didn't admit it, then Yi Liangqiu would go to hell. Yi Liangqiu looked at Pei Chichi and chuckled after a long time. Miss Pei, you know him very well, but I know him better. Pei Chichi looked down. But Miss Yi, you missed something. She raised her eyes and looked at Yi Liangqiu. I have feelings for Anlan. I'm not a cold-blooded person. I don't want to hurt him. If you hurt him, you'll be able to live a happy life a long time ago. Is this not attractive to you? Yi Liangqiu's expression was still calm. Pei Chichi let out a long sigh. Is this what you want? Then this isn't an interview, but an advertisement. Jaren's fees are very expensive. I think there's no other place that would dare to publish Miss Yi's advertisement, right? Yi Liangqiu did not say anything. Pei Chichi pushed the document back. 50 million. All right. Yi Liangqiu's tone was indifferent. She took out a check from her bag and placed it in front of Pei Chichi. After a while, she said, "I'm sorry, I just want to find a father for Mu Yun." On her face, there was a hint of sadness. She was also extremely beautiful. Sitting there, she was like an extremely beautiful painting. If Pei Chichi's beauty was like an oil painting, then Yi Liangqiu's beauty was like the meticulous brushwork of traditional Chinese painting. She was beautiful and dignified, and every part of her was exquisite and beautiful. Pei Chichi looked at the woman in front of her and was a little stunned. Combined with what Pei Huan said, there was no doubt that Yi Liangqiu was not telling the truth. She was wearing a mask. Chapter 1141. The corners of Yi Liangqiu's mouth curled up. She smiled faintly, her expression flawless. "If I didn't know that you weren't Anlan's lover, Pei Chichi, I would probably be thinking about how to deal with you." It was as if she was climbing to the top of King Entertainment step by step. Those who stood in her way were all cleared away by her. After Yi Liangqiu finished speaking, there was a look of determination in her eyes. This was Yi Liangqiu, the Yi Liangqiu that Pei Huan had spoken of. She didn't hide herself at all, exposing herself to Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi snapped out of her trance after a long while. Then, she smiled and turned on the camera to take a picture of her. Sensing Yi Liangqiu's resistance, Pei Chichi's voice was a little cold. "Miss Yi, I have my own insistence. I want to use the pictures I take, not those hard shots that you use to deal with the public." Yi Liangqiu was wearing a bohemian dress today. Her slightly curled long hair was let down casually. She had a languid beauty. Pei Chichi carried the camera, feeling a little excited. What she had said just now was just a bluff. She was Yi Liangqiu's fangirl, and it was her dream to be able to take pictures of Yi Liangqiu. Moreover, she had a little something else in mind. Pei Chichi directed Yi Liangqiu to put on the pose she wanted. At this moment, she was the master of Yi Liangqiu. Her aura was the same as when old Khan scolded Pei Huan to tears. She would yell at her if she didn't listen. "Lie on the sofa, yes, look at the camera." Pei Chichi narrowed one eye and then said impatiently, "Not the perfect expression is the most touching. I want to be direct, naked, and not this kind of dull expression." After a pause, Pei Chichi roared, "What expression do you have when you lie on Qin Anlan? Imagine." In Yi Liangqiu's eyes, there was a hint of anger and helplessness. It was a good feeling. Pei Chichi captured it and took a picture. She looked at the picture with the camera and was very satisfied. Yi Liangqiu's neck was a little stiff. She sat up straight and wanted to take a look, but Pei Chichi didn't show her. Yi Liangqiu then realized that Pei Chichi was a tough nut to crack. "I think you should know that I'm not doing this for money." "Just for money, just for money," Pei Chichi snorted lightly and said, "But you have to think carefully. If this thing fails, not only will you be hurt, but Mu Yun will also be hurt. He's still a child. Can he take so much?" Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. "Pei Chichi, you don't know anything. Do you know that you're not my only enemy? There are countless women in King Entertainment." Pei Chichi was stunned. She looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Perhaps I should thank you. Because of you, he has been clean these past 2 years. But Pei Chichi, he will always let go of you because his heart softens. What will happen to him then? I think he will probably live a more indulgent life than before. And now is my best chance." Yi Liangqiu was taking a gamble. Just like every step she took in King Entertainment, she was taking a gamble. Pei Chichi was stunned. She let out a long sigh and didn't say anything. She knew that after this was published, Qin Anlan would definitely blame her. But she would rather Anlan blame her than Yi Liangqiu. She would rather it be like this, because she had Qin Anlan so much, while Yi Liangqiu had given birth to Mu Yun without a name. Yi Liangqiu might be good at scheming, but in Pei Chichi's eyes, this kind of scheming made one's heart ache. Yi Liangqiu was actually only 26 years old, but she had a 7-year-old child. When she and Qin Anlan got together, she wasn't even 20. Chapter 1142. 7 years. Yi Liangqiu had persevered for 7 years. She had waited for a man for 7 years. She deserved to be treated well. Pei Chichi smiled faintly. Perhaps Anlan would be very happy. She kept her things and walked out, taking the check with her. When she reached the door, she heard a familiar voice behind her before she entered the elevator. Chichi. She froze for a moment and turned her head slowly. It was Qin Anlan. He looked at her and asked slowly, "Are you here to interview Yi Liangqiu?" Pei Chichi replied with a millimeter and tightened her grip on the things in her hands. "Anlan, I have to go back to the club." There was not much expression on his face. With one hand in his pocket, he said slowly, "Don't you want to have lunch together?" Pei Chichi had lived with him for 2 years. His subtle changes in expression could not fool her. She was a little wary and took a step back into the elevator. "Chichi, this elevator has stopped." Qin Anlan's tone was even more indifferent as he walked forward slowly. Her little hands were behind her and her body was suddenly pressed against the wall of the elevator. At this moment, Pei Chichi had a feeling that nothing Yi Liangqiu did could be hidden from Anlan. In fact, everything that Yi Liangqiu did was under Anlan's nose. Perhaps Anlan had already known about the contents of the draft. "Chichi, let me take a look at the draft." Finally, he had forced her into a corner. His gaze was deep, but he did not take another step forward. Pei Chichi bit her lip and looked up at him. These are all very common questions. How can 50 million be a common question? His handsome face was tinged with a hint of anger. He pressed her shoulder with one hand, not giving her a chance to struggle. He took her draft with the other hand and quickly skimmed through it. It was just as he had expected. Pei Chichi looked up at him and said pitifully, "Anlan." After he finished reading, he still held her down with one hand, not giving her a chance to break free. His gaze was so heavy that it was almost dripping water. "Pei Chichi, don't tell me that these were written by you." "I wrote it, for 50 million, she said boldly, "and to divorce you." He sneered and narrowed his eyes at her. "Pei Chichi, I don't know when you've stopped being so kind." How could Qin Anlan not know Pei Chichi? How could she write such a thing? But damn it, she wanted to publish this kind of thing to help Yi Liangqiu. Did he not exist in her heart at all? Even after losing her memory, she was still so sure that she loved Tang Yu. Qin Anlan's eyes were a little sad. He pressed her down, unwilling to let go of her. But he couldn't hurt her. After a long time, he murmured, "Chichi, don't you love me even a little?" As he said that, he leaned forward and pressed his face into her neck. There was a vulnerability that he had never felt before. Because he felt that she was really going to leave him. Regarding the matter between him and Yi Liangqiu, she had handled it from the perspective of an outsider. She didn't feel any pain at all. She didn't feel pain at all. Her heart didn't ache for him at all. "But Chichi, I'm in pain. But this pain was caused by me. If I had known that I loved you so much, I wouldn't have allowed myself to have a single trace of my past. I would have been clean like Tang Yu." He hugged Pei Chichi, and Pei Chichi could feel his pain. Chapter 1143. Pei Chichi couldn't remain indifferent. She slowly stretched out her hand and gently pressed on his shoulder. "Anlan." He smiled bitterly. He rested his face on her shoulder and didn't say a word. The script fell on the floor and no one cared about it anymore. Yi Liangqiu stood far away and watched Qin Anlan embrace Pei Chichi. She stood there quietly and didn't make a sound. She stood there until her body was cold. She smiled softly and suddenly looked up. There was a hint of warmth in her eyes. She hadn't cried for so many years. She had endured all the pain, but at this moment, she wanted to cry. Because she couldn't see any hope. Yi Liangqiu didn't cry. Instead, she smiled and slowly turned around to walk back to the guest room. She closed the door and felt the pain in her heart. Pei Chichi looked at the closed door and said softly, "Anlan, are you really not going to consider it? She really loves you." She lowered her head to look at Qin Anlan, her fingers gently caressing his short hair. Her voice was pleasant to the ears. "Perhaps you feel that Yi Liangqiu is scheming against you, but Anlan, isn't it more precious for a person to want another person so much, to exhaust all of his efforts to obtain her?" Qin Anlan was stunned for a while and didn't reply to Pei Chichi. He didn't tell her that if Pei Chichi didn't exist in this world, he probably wouldn't be so cold-hearted towards Yi Liangqiu and wouldn't be so determined not to love her. He wouldn't tell her this because he couldn't bear to see her troubled. In the past, he only felt that he liked her and wanted her. But now, he suddenly wanted her to be happy. "Chichi, let's go back for dinner when you're free." He stroked her hair, just like in the past. His gaze was deep and the pain in his eyes made her unable to reject him. She said softly, "Okay." Qin Anlan smiled lightly and let go of her. He took a step back and pressed the elevator button. "I'll send you down." He didn't force her at all. He didn't even ask her to leave Tangyu. Retreating in order to advance was something he could do as well. When Pei Chichi left the headquarters of King Entertainment, she let out a long sigh of relief. Because there was no more script, Qin Anlan did not allow her to publish it. No matter what, she had to talk to Yi Liangqiu. When she dialed Yi Liangqiu's number, Yi Liangqiu was very calm and just said that she got it. Later, Pei Chichi sent the check to her. After doing all this, her heart was heavy. She had no intention to hurt Anlan, but it was true that she had stepped between Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu. Jiaran magazine. Pei Chichi scratched her head in frustration. Amy moved her chair over and said softly, "What's wrong? Did old Khan scold you because you messed up Empress Yi's matter?" Pei Chichi glanced at Amy. "No." Amy sighed softly. "Actually, Qin Anlan is such an idiot. Think about it, with Empress Yi's current status, what man can't she find? Why does she have to rely on him? She raised her son for 7 years. Only an idiot would wait for 7 years like a fool." Pei Chichi hung her head. The person involved can't see the situation clearly. Amy's expression suddenly became a little unnatural. "Chichi, don't think too much. If you want to be with Mr. Tang wholeheartedly, you can't be fickle. These few years, Tang Yu has been living like a monk." She paused. "You can't be with Qin Anlan just because you sympathize with him." Pei Chichi laughed and rested her chin on her hand. "I won't." Chapter 1144. She liked the cool Amy. She looked at Amy and said, "My dream is to take a stunning set of photos." Amy looked at her and thought that she was silly. Stunning photos? In the past, when Pei Chichi and old Khan took photos of rich ladies, it was quite stunning. However, Pei Chichi had forgotten all about it. She was living like the naive Tang Xin and the 20-year-old Pei Chichi who had not had the chance to enjoy life. Of course, old Khan still reprimanded her afterward. This was what Laro Khan said. "How could you lose the manuscript? If it is published, it will be a civil war within King Entertainment. If we do a serialization, the sales will go through the roof." Old Khan said it shamelessly. Pei Chichi looked at him and felt that his words sounded familiar, as if someone had said the same thing to her in the past. Old Khan held a cigarette and puffed out smoke. 50 million, 50 million. Pei Chichi, how many advertisements does our Jiao Ren magazine have to sell? How much alcohol do I have to drink to get 50 million? How could it be lost? And if it was done, Tang Yu would be happy. Once he was happy, he would allocate a huge sum of money to their magazine. They would become the industry leaders soon. It had to be said that old Khan worked hard for the money for the milk powder. He had no choice. He had to support his wife and children. He couldn't earn money from the rich ladies outside, so he could only sell his moral integrity. Pei Chichi pouted. "Why don't you go to King Entertainment's trash and look again?" Old Khan waved his hand. "Forget it." He paused. "There will be an environmental photography exhibition next month. It's quite famous in the industry. I'll sign you up. You'll have to submit 4 works. That should be fine, right? Pei Chichi couldn't accept old Khan's change of heart. He had been so unscrupulous just a moment ago, but now he was upright again. Old Khan knew what she was thinking. He pressed the cigarette butt into the ashtray and smiled. Chichi, we live to live better. Of course, there are many people who are not living as well as we are. Doing charity isn't just talk. How can you do charity without money? Do you use your mouth to talk? Even if you paint a big cake, other people won't be full, right? Pei Chichi looked at him. Old Khan took out a stack of receipts from his drawer and looked at Pei Chichi. These are the receipts that I've sponsored for the past 20 years. It's been so many years, and it's like a part of my life. If I don't do it, my whole body will feel uncomfortable and my heart will feel stifled. Does Pei Huan know about it? Pei Chichi asked him. Old Khan smiled. I know. In the beginning, she found out that I always sent money to a few fixed accounts. She thought that I was supporting other people and argued with me for a while. Later, I took her to the mountains to see those children. She went to see it with me, and as she watched, she started crying. She hit me and asked why I didn't tell her earlier. Pei Huan had some savings. A selfish person like her actually took out 100 million in one go. That 100 million yuan was used to build a mountain road for the children in the countryside. Those children no longer had to walk the dangerous heaven stairs to school every day. Of course, that 100 million yuan made old Khan kneel and lick his wife for a month. In the past, he only thought that Pei Huan was cute and suitable for him. But after that time, he felt that he loved her very much. She was already a part of his life. As old Khan spoke, Pei Chichi listened carefully. After a long time, she said softly, Old Khan, you're very blessed. Chapter 1145. Chichi, you used to go there with me. Old Khan sounded nostalgic. We took pictures together and sold them for a lot of money to buy toys and school bags for the children. At that time, Chichi was unhappy. He took her to the mountains and she slowly integrated into it. To old Khan, Pei Chichi also needed his help. Just like those children. Pei Chichi's voice was light. Is that why you wanted to make money so much? It's not that great. It's also for Pei Huan and the children. Old Khan stood up and patted Pei Chichi on the shoulder. Chichi, I think you have the potential to do charity work. Because she had 2 rich backers behind her, Pei Chichi was not stupid, but she was willing to do something for those children. She looked at Old Khan. Let's go there when we're free. Old Khan, let's change the film festival to an auction. Old Khan smiled and said, it's not a problem with the organizers. I'll arrange it. Pei Chichi nodded and went out. Old Khan looked at Pei Chichi with mixed feelings. Pei Huan was the one who came up with this trick. Pei Huan had said that Qin Anlan and Pei Chichi would definitely get a divorce, but before that, they had to get some benefits. He had occupied someone else's wife for 2 years. Shouldn't he give her some rent? Old Khan thought it made sense. While Qin Anlan and Tang Yu were at each other's throats, it was convenient to get some benefits. That night, he really felt that his wife was very wise and far-sighted. As Pei Chichi walked out, Amy mouthed, "Were you criticized?" Pei Chichi shook her head. Amy covered her face in horror. Then Pei Chichi, "You're finished. If you didn't get criticized, then old Khan must have mentioned charity work to you, right?" Pei Chichi was dumbfounded. Amy was very sympathetic. Old Khan is no longer the old Khan he used to be. He has been led astray by his wife. The way old Khan spoke now was the same as the former chief editor, full of tricks. Pei Chichi, this naive and sweet girl, would definitely be fooled once she was fooled. Just like the few of them in the past, there was a time when they were tricked into leaving only enough money for their meals and used the rest for charity. Pei Chichi smiled. I think he's quite cute, just like the former chief editor. She said it very smoothly, but then she was stunned. Amy looked at her expectantly, but didn't dare to rush her. Pei Chichi knocked her head with her hand. She clearly remembered something just now, but after a while, she couldn't remember anything. Don't think about it, Chichi. It doesn't matter if you want to come or not. Amy's voice was soft, afraid that she would scare her. All of them were especially afraid that something would happen to Pei Chichi, so it didn't matter if she couldn't remember for the rest of her life. Pei Chichi calmed down and her mind was blank. After a pause, she said softly, I seem to have remembered something just now, but now I've forgotten it. Amy hugged her as if she was a pitiful little girl. Actually, Chichi was no different from before. She was just a little childish. Tang Yu didn't mind, and neither did they. Pei Chichi smiled. Amy, you look so nervous. Chapter 1146. That was the closest thing to the truth. Pei Chichi held her breath and looked at Amy. Chichi, don't think about it. I'll feel guilty if you have a headache. They had all been warned by Laro Khan not to talk about the past with Chichi. She had been impulsive just now, and now that she thought about it, she felt a little regretful. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and said after a long time, Amy, I'll definitely remember it. Amy smiled with tears in her eyes. Pei Chichi smiled too. Although she couldn't remember it, she felt very happy. She had friends, loved ones, and a little heart. She felt that her past was so full that it filled up the blanks in the present. So what if she couldn't remember it? These people wouldn't disappear. They still loved her and had been waiting for her for so long. That night, she lay on the balcony of her apartment in Shia City and looked at the moon outside. The moonlight was clear and calm like water, sprinkling on her body. Her heart was also calm. She had made up her mind. Perhaps she had been wrong all along. She had been waiting for Anlan to give up, and she had thought that it wouldn't be too cruel to Anlan. However, she had been cruel to Tang Yu. He was waiting for her. But she hadn't replied, and she hadn't been determined to be with him. She suddenly understood why Tang Yu hadn't really wanted her. It was because of his pride, and because she was still Qin Anlan's wife. Pei Chichi suddenly picked up her phone and called Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan picked up the phone. At that moment, he was in his penthouse apartment, looking at the moonlight like Pei Chichi. Chichi. He called her name hoarsely. He had a feeling that she was going to say something to him. Pei Chichi's heart was beating a little fast, and her voice was a little dry. Anlan, I'm sorry. There was a long pause on the other end before he said, okay. He didn't ask her why, didn't ask her what had happened. He only said one word. Pei Chichi was very sad. She was so sad that she cried. She kept apologizing to him. Her words made his heart ache. Qin Anlan's voice was gentler than the night, but it was extremely hoarse. He said, Chichi, silly girl. What did she have to let him down? He was the one who possessed her for 2 years. He was the one who deceived her. Finally, his little girl was going to say goodbye to him, and he had no reason to keep her. Qin Anlan raised his head. He had never thought that he would give up so easily, and just let her be. Chichi, sing me another song. Qin Anlan smiled. He poured himself a glass of red wine and shook it gently. Her songs were terrible. He had said it more than once, but after that, he could no longer hear it. She was singing Two Tigers. Qin Anlan said in a low voice, Chichi, it's terrible. He didn't ask her to stop, so his little girl kept singing. In the end, she said she was sorry. She kept talking until her voice was hoarse. Qin Anlan had thought that if she said that she didn't want a divorce, he would go to her side without hesitation and take her away without thinking about whether she would regret it. However, his little girl finally hardened her heart, and he finally lost her completely. That night, she cried, and he was drunk. His stomach felt like it was on fire. He didn't even remember how much he drank. He only knew that he kept drinking. At dawn, Qin Anlan called 120. Chapter 1147. Kaim called Pei Chichi. Miss Pei, President Qin's stomach has perforated and has been admitted to the hospital. He's refusing surgery now. Kaim sounded anxious. Can you come over? Pei Chichi asked the hospital and immediately turned the car around to head to see City General Hospital. She rushed to the emergency room where the doctor was waiting for her. When he saw her, his voice was stern. The patient is already in such a state and is still refusing surgery. Are you his family member? Pei Chichi did not hesitate. Yes. Where do I sign? She signed her name without even looking at the form. The doctor closed the form. Go take a look. If you have anything to say, tell us. We're very humane. Pei Chichi's face was pale and her footsteps were unsteady. At this moment, she felt extremely guilty and upset. Anlan's stomach had perforated because he had been drinking. It was her fault. Kaim supported her and said in her ear, Miss Pei, you can't collapse now. President Qin still needs you. Pei Chichi nodded and ran into the emergency room. She walked quickly to the operating table. She half knelt in front of Qin Anlan and said anxiously, Anlan, how are you feeling? Her fingers held Qin Anlan's hand. His hand was burning. Qin Anlan opened his eyes. His gaze was weak but his lips were curled into a faint smile. He looked at her and smiled gently. Chichi, why are you crying? He wanted to raise his fingers to hold her. He wanted to touch her again and wipe away her tears. However, he could not even lift his hand. Qin Anlan closed his eyes. He didn't have the strength to look at her again. All right, the patient will be undergoing surgery soon. The doctor was already preparing. He was expressionless. The family member is waiting outside and will be out in about 2 hours. Pei Chichi was supported by Kaim outside. Her gaze was fixed on the door of the operating room. Kaim's voice was very soft. Miss Pei, President Qin really loves you. I've never seen him like this before. Pei Chichi raised her head and let out a long sigh. She wanted to split herself in two but that was impossible and unrealistic. She stood outside, waiting for Qin Anlan to come out, waiting for him to be well. KME, on the other hand, went to buy some necessities. He felt a little guilty. His role in this whole incident wasn't honorable, and Boss Qin seemed to have noticed it. After buying the necessities, he went to settle various matters and accompanied Pei Chichi. Fortunately, the surgery was performed in time, and Qin Anlan was fine. He was soon pushed out of the operating theater and into the VIP ward. The surgery wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. The nurse changed the intravenous drip and said to Pei Chichi gently, the patient can't eat or drink for the next few days. The doctor will tell you when he can eat. The doctor will tell you when he can eat. Pei Chichi nodded. She looked at Qin Anlan and slowly sat beside him. He had a high fever, so she kept taking care of him and cooling him down. She was so meticulous that Kaim felt that they were truly in love. Qin Anlan was unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. During these 2 days and 2 nights, Pei Chichi was in the hospital. She didn't call Tang Yu, because she forgot. The night Tang Yu returned to B City from a city, Xia City was pitch black. In fact, he already knew that Qin Anlan was hospitalized and that Pei Chichi was in the hospital. She didn't tell him and he didn't call her to ask. He wasn't an unreasonable person but he still cared. Did Chichi really not love Qin Anlan when she lost her memory? If she didn't love him, how could she forget to call him? How could she forget that he was returning to B City today? Chapter 1148. He stood on the balcony of his apartment in Xia City and smoked for the whole night. That night, his phone didn't ring. 1 day, 2 days, he saw the news of Qin Anlan being hospitalized in the newspaper and the media writing about the scandal between Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan. Tang Yu could only smile bitterly. He looked at the night sky and took out his phone. After staring at it for a long time, there were no words on it. He took the glass of red wine to the side and typed 1 word at a time. Don't be too tired. After writing these 5 words, Tang Yu realized how petty he was. Yes, he was jealous and unhappy. At least, he didn't completely own her heart. He didn't know about the 2 years she and Anlan spent together, and he didn't dare to know about it. His heart ached faintly, but he was willing to accept it. Putting his phone aside, Tang Yu took a shower and came out wearing only a bathrobe. He picked up his phone with mixed feelings. He hoped to see her reply, but strangely, he didn't. She didn't reply. There were no words on the phone, only a few messages from Xiao Ran. Tang Yu pursed his lips. Then he looked at the night sky outside, thinking about her and angry at her. He also felt that he was ridiculous. She was so young. Why should he be angry with her? Even if she liked Anlan. Wasn't it normal? They lived together for 2 years, and she forgot everything. Anlan loved her so much. He was scared just thinking about it. In such a long time, when she was treated gently by Anlan, she didn't fall in love with Anlan, but was there a big difference? At the hospital, Pei Chichi only saw the message 2 hours later. She looked at the few words for a long time, then looked up at Anlan who was lying on the bed. After a long time, there was a reply. Yeah. Then, she thought for a moment and added another message. Are you back? Tang Yu wasn't asleep. When he heard his phone ring, he picked it up and looked at it. Only Pei Chichi could make him feel uneasy. Pursing his lips, he looked at the message she left for him. Feeling vexed, he didn't reply. Pei Chichi waited for a long time but did not see him. She thought that he might have fallen asleep. 2 days later, Qin Anlan woke up. Tang Yu didn't send any more messages or calls. Vaguely, Pei Chichi had a feeling that he was angry. She didn't know how to explain, and she couldn't explain, but she couldn't ignore Anlan. After Qin Anlan woke up, the doctor said he could eat some liquid food. She cooked porridge for him and fed him little by little. Qin Anlan leaned against the headboard and looked at her submissive face. His voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, how many days have you been here? She nodded and fed him again, but he didn't eat it. Instead, he grabbed her slender wrist. Anlan. She raised her eyes and looked at him. Qin Anlan saw that there were dark circles under her eyes. She must have stayed up late. He smiled bitterly. Chichi, if I didn't know that you loved him deeply, I would have thought that you had feelings for me too. He almost couldn't bear to give up. Pei Chichi said after a long time, Anlan, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize to me, Chichi. You didn't do anything wrong to me. I was delusional. He held her hand slowly. I've signed the divorce papers and left them in the apartment. I'll get Kaim to sign them later. Chapter 1149. Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. You're right. I should give Mu Yun a father. Pei Chichi hugged him. Qin Anlan was in pain, but he held it in. After a while, he chuckled. Chichi, be happy in the future. He rested his chin on the top of her head. His eyes were warm, and his voice was hoarse. It's okay if you can't remember. He loves you very much. Pei Chichi cried in his arms. Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. Chichi, why do I feel like I'm marrying off my daughter? He liked her very much, and he didn't want to let go of her, but he gave her what she wanted just like that. All right, let's go back. Kaim is here. He stroked her hair, his voice deep. Pei Chichi shook her head in his arms and hugged him again. Qin Anlan felt terrible, but he only smiled and said, let's go back. She shook her head furiously and cried like a child. Qin Anlan called Kaim and asked him to send Pei Chichi back. Pei Chichi was a little dizzy, and she didn't realize that the car had arrived at Xia City. Kaim stopped the car and said calmly, Miss Pei, go on up. President Qin said that he wants me to watch you go up. Pei Chichi was stunned for a moment before she said, take good care of him. Okay, I will. Kaim sighed. President Qin has really let go. In the future, he said, sometimes being cruel is the greatest kindness to him. He knew that Pei Chichi had feelings for Qin Anlan. After all, they had lived together for 2 years. It was really hard for her to not care about him. However, if she were to interfere in President Qin's life now, it would be hard for President Qin to get over it. How could Pei Chichi not know that? She looked down. Call me if you need anything. Kaim sighed inwardly. If it weren't for Tang Yu, Pei Chichi would probably have fallen in love with President Qin. She definitely would have. Pei Chichi got out of the car and walked into the elevator. Relieved, Kaim drove the car away. Walking out of the elevator, Pei Chichi's legs were soft. She clearly knew in her heart that she and Anlan could not be like before. She was selfish. On one hand, she wanted Tang Yu's love. On the other hand, she didn't want to give up Anlan's warmth. She didn't want to give up the memories they once had. However, these two things couldn't coexist, because Anlan would suffer. When he got home, he closed the door but didn't turn on the lights. Instead, he leaned against the door. The lights suddenly came on. Her eyes were a little sore because she had stayed up for 2 nights and also because she had cried. Under the bright lights, she saw Tang Yu sitting on the sofa, looking at her quietly. "You're at home." She walked over slowly and sat beside him. "Millimeter," Tang Yu replied. He carried her onto his lap and kissed her forehead. "Go take a shower. You smell like medicine." Pei Chichi sniffed herself and stuck out her tongue. "I'm done." She was pretending to be relaxed. How could he not see it? He felt a little pained in his heart, but he only smiled. Pei Chichi walked into the bathroom and sniffed herself again. She turned on the warm water and felt a little uneasy. She had a feeling that there was something hidden under Tang Yu's calm exterior. Actually, he should be angry. She raised her head and let the warm water wash over her body. Feeling a little tired, she slowly leaned against the wall. The bathroom door was pulled open. She looked up and saw Tang Yu standing at the door. Chapter 1150. Pei Chichi covered her body and pursed her lips, looking a little uneasy. "Tang Yu, let's bathe together." He removed his clothes calmly, as if they were a normal couple sharing a bathroom. When he walked over like that, her heart trembled with every step he took. She had never seen him like that, at least not in her memory. Tang Yu stood up and rushed forward. Then, seeing that she was standing there, he grabbed her and brought her over. He cleaned her up as if he was washing a kitten or a puppy. Pei Chichi's head and face were full of bubbles. She felt uncomfortable, but she did not dare to make a sound. At that moment, she was a little afraid of him not wearing any clothes. Finally, he finished washing her and carried her back to the bedroom with a towel. He let her sit in his arms and helped her dry her hair. His actions were very slow, but Pei Chichi felt that it was the prelude to execution. When her hair was dry, she was pushed down. Her long black hair was scattered all over the pillow. Her face was a little pale, and her eyes were wide open. She looked very lovely. She was a little nervous. Her little hand grabbed the front of his bathrobe. "Tang Yu." He leaned forward and sniffed her hair. His voice was hoarse. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." Her voice was trembling. She looked at him helplessly and her little hand tightened. Tang Yu bent down and rubbed the tip of his nose against hers. The cool touch made her feel a little more comfortable, but she was even more afraid. He had not done anything yet, but she felt a tearing force. Pei Chichi bit her lip. Her little mouth was red, and her eyes were almost watery. "Don't be afraid. I'll be gentle." His voice was low. After that, he did not hold back anymore. He kissed her little mouth and wantonly kissed her. She whimpered and struggled. Her hands were pinned to her sides. Tang Yu stopped kissing her and looked down at her from above, his eyes burning. Pei Chichi felt like he was going to eat her up. Her body trembled, and her petite mouth was slightly open. It was slightly swollen. He freed a hand and caressed her little mouth gently. "Chichi, I can't wait any longer." His voice was deep and gentle. As he spoke, he placed her hands on his waist and lowered his body to kiss her. Pei Chichi was in so much pain that she wanted to hit him with her fists. He was a bastard. He had said that it wouldn't hurt and that he would be gentle, but it was so painful. Her long eyelashes blinked tears, and her small face was full of hopelessness. He lied to her. This kind of thing was not comfortable at all, only painful. Her body struggled with all her might, crying loudly, but she couldn't escape. How could a man who had been forbidden for 2 years endure it? Even though she was crying and struggling, he still pressed her down and did it without a care. Pei Chichi cried until she couldn't move anymore. She was exhausted, so she closed her eyes and let him do whatever he wanted. In her half-conscious state, she heard his moaning and hugged him tightly. This kind of thing was so painful, but why did he look so comfortable? This hug completely messed up his rhythm. He wasn't that rough at first, but when she hugged him like this, he was so aroused that he didn't care about anything else. Pei Chichi's voice was hoarse from crying, but he didn't let her go. It was until late at night when he was finally satisfied. She lay in his arms like a little animal that was on the verge of death. Her little hands hugged his neck, and she was still trembling. Tang Yu held her hand and looked at the blister on her hand. He asked softly, "How did your hand get hurt?" She was half awake and said in a low voice, "It's to make porridge for Anlan." Anlan? Chapter 1151. He had thought that he was the only one who knew how to cook, but it turned out that she knew how to make porridge for Qin Anlan too. Tang Yu got off the bed nimbly. Pei Chichi's body was empty as she opened her eyes to search for him. After a while, he returned with a tube of ointment in his hand. He came over and gently applied it for her. Pei Chichi looked up at him and bit her lips. "Are you angry?" It was only then that they could talk properly. It was already 4 o'clock at night. "Why would I be angry?" He applied the ointment for her and stroked her hair. "All right, time to sleep." He lay flat on his back with Pei Chichi beside him. He did not hug her for a long time, and she felt uneasy. She hugged his arm and said softly, "I couldn't ignore him at that time." Tang Yu sighed and said softly in the dark, "Chichi, I've never been angry about this." He wasn't afraid. He was just a little afraid. Did she like Anlan? So, he had lost control tonight. It was clearly not the best time, and she was clearly very tired, but he still wanted her. It was almost violent. "Oh," Pei Chichi replied. She muttered in her heart. He was clearly angry. Later, she hugged his arm but could not fall asleep. An hour later, Tang Yu asked in a hoarse voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" She was still very sleepy when they did it earlier and slept the entire time. Honestly, he wasn't that happy either. She didn't seem to feel anything. As a man, it was quite depressing. Pei Chichi's little face was pressed against his arm. After a while, she said softly, "Tang Yu, it hurts a little." He hugged her shoulders and turned on the bedside lamp. He sat up immediately and looked at her eyes. "Where does it hurt?" Pei Chichi lowered her head shyly and did not say anything. Tang Yu understood immediately. His expression was a little profound as he reached out and turned on all the lights. She realized that he was probably trying to do something. She hugged the bedsheet in her arms and refused to let him check. Tang Yu coaxed her, "All right, be good. Let me see." She refused and kicked him. She was a little stubborn, but in the end, she was the one who was in pain. Tang Yu also let her do whatever she wanted. He knew that he had gone too far tonight. He reached out and held her in his arms. After coaxing her for a while, he half knelt down and examined her carefully under the light. Pei Chichi turned her face to the side shyly. Tang Yu's eyes seemed to be on fire. Looking at her like this, she was naturally a little emotional, but she forcefully suppressed it because she was a little hurt. "I'll get a hot towel to help you apply a hot compress." He kissed her forehead. When he got out of bed, she tugged at his bathrobe. He turned back and said, "I'll be back soon." Pei Chichi watched him walk into the bathroom. When he came back, he had a towel in his hand. He helped her warm up, and she felt better. She let out a sigh. Tang Yu raised his head. After a long time, he asked softly, "Chichi, did I make you feel uncomfortable doing that?" Actually, he wanted to ask in more detail, but he did not. Pei Chichi pouted her lips and snuggled in his embrace. After a while, she said softly, "It hurts." "Only pain?" Tang Yu thought about it silently. Was it because he had not done it for 2 years that his skills were rusty? Pei Chichi bit her lips and leaned in his embrace. She asked in a soft voice, "Are you feeling very comfortable?" His Adam's apple bobbed for a while before he replied, "Yes." Chapter 1152. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chichi, speechless. How could a man be described as a soul? However, he still felt a little helpless as he looked at her because he had made his little girl feel pain. Lying side by side, he said in a low voice, "It won't hurt anymore. But it still hurts after you did it a few times." Pei Chichi turned over and lay in his arms, looking especially rascally. "I won't do it again." Tang Yu looked down at the little person in his arms. His heart was filled with tenderness and helplessness. However, at times like this, he was still willing to coax her. "All right, I won't do it again." Pei Chichi looked up at him for a while before lowering her head again. "You're lying." He seemed to be enjoying it so much. How could he be willing to give it up? Tang Yu chuckled. "Yes, I'm lying." As she said that, she felt a heart-rending resistance. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Didn't they say that men had to rest for half an hour? And he had just done it a few times. Her little hands hugged him tightly, fearing that he would do something stupid again. Tang Yu could feel the little thing's fear in his arms. He rubbed her little head and said in a low voice, "You're in so much pain. How could I do it again?" She buried herself in his arms and said after a long time, "I cried before, but you didn't stop either." His heart softened as he listened. His fingers caressed the place where she had endured him, and he asked gently, "Does it still hurt?" "It hurts," she said coyly as she wrapped her little hands around his neck. Tang Yu smiled and comforted her gently. As he rubbed her, not only him, but her breathing was also slightly erratic, and her little body kept burrowing into his arms. She didn't feel much at the start, only pain. But as he continued to rub it, she couldn't take it anymore. She pursed her lips and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't move." She couldn't stop her voice. Tang Yu naturally felt the change in her. He chuckled and whispered into her ear, "Chichi, if you want, I'll feed you a little more." "I don't want to." She closed her eyes tightly and hit his shoulder with her little hand. "Go to sleep." He was only teasing her because her body couldn't take another round. The two of them lay together and had many things to say to each other. Pei Chichi's face was resting on his waist and her voice was like a little lamb. "Tang Yu, Anlan has agreed to the divorce." He propped himself up and looked down at her. Pei Chichi also raised her head and looked at each other in the misty gaze. After a long while, Tang Yu said in a low voice, "Chichi, are you very sad?" "Yes." She threw herself into his arms. "Tang Yu, I don't know what happened in the past, but he has been by my side for the past 2 years. He treats me very well. I think if it wasn't for Anlan, I might not be able to appear in front of you in such a good condition today." He sighed in his heart. How could he not know all of this? So, he did not stop Qin Anlan from seeing her. If that was the case, he would have lost. Tang Yu hugged her as though he was carrying a little daughter. She buried herself in his arms and cried for another man. And he could only accompany her. His heart was heavy, but he knew that she was finally back. "Chichi, come back. You will slowly forget about those 2 years in the future." Chapter 1153. As the days passed, Pei Chichi visited Qin Anlan twice more. She didn't say anything and just sat by the bed to take care of him, peeling fruits for him. Qin Anlan was able to get up and walk around, but he still rested in bed most of the time. He quietly watched as Pei Chichi peeled fruits and suddenly said, "I've asked Kaim to bring the agreement over. You can sign it after you see that there are no problems." Pei Chichi's gaze fell on his face and then moved to the brown paper bag at the head of the bed. After a long time, she said softly, "Anlan, sign it." He smiled and looked at her. "Pei Chichi, I'm not doing this to help you. I'm doing this for myself." She didn't understand. He continued and smiled. "I'm going to marry Yi Liangqiu." Pei Chichi couldn't believe it. He had decided to get married so soon. "So sign it." Qin Anlan looked out of the window. "Pei Chichi, you don't have to feel guilty because you never liked me before. I probably couldn't accept it, so I told you that I was your husband after you lost your memory." His gaze slowly fell on her face and he smiled bitterly. It was my wishful thinking from the beginning to the end. Now, Pei Chichi, you're free. There was a touch of sadness in Qin Anlan's eyes. I should be the one apologizing. I wasted 2 years of your life and I selfishly wanted to keep you. Pei Chichi didn't say anything and kept looking at him. After a long time, she got up gently and went forward to hug him. Anlan, there's no relationship that you're sorry for. Let's not talk about it like this in the future, okay? He closed his eyes and there was a touch of pain in them. Chichi, this was the last hug. Let me hug you for the last time. The girl who acted like a spoiled child, who asked him for pocket money, who asked him to build a snowman in the New York winter, would never appear in front of him again. Qin Anlan's eyes were warm, and his voice was hoarse. Sign it, or I'll regret it. When Pei Chichi was signing, her fingers were trembling. Anlan, if this was a mistake, then it was a beautiful one. Anlan, thank you. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Anlan, I wish you happiness. He nodded. I will. I'll be getting married in Las Vegas, so I won't invite you. Pei Chichi understood that with Yi Liangqiu's status, she wouldn't reveal her marriage. She didn't ask Qin Anlan why he suddenly wanted to marry Yi Liangqiu. Just like what Kaim said, it was best not to ask. She and Qin Anlan officially divorced. When she got the green book, she felt like she had had a dream. After returning home, she lay in bed and had a dream about New York. In the dream, there was no Anlan, but Tang Yu. When she woke up, she was sweating all over and felt like a small animal was licking her body. When she opened her eyes, she saw Tang Yu's head. The light in the bedroom was dim. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and reached out to pull his black hair. You're back. He had been on a business trip a lot these days, always for 1 or 2 days. She could only see him 2 or 3 times a week. Tang Yu nodded and buried his face in her neck. His voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, your marriage with Qin Anlan is cancelled. Chapter 1154. She nudged him. Hurry up and go take a shower. He sniffed her neck with the tip of his nose and smiled. Chichi, your body smells like sweat. Let's shower together. With that said, before she could reject him, he carried her and walked straight to the bathroom. As he walked, he coaxed her to unbutton his shirt. Pei Chichi blushed. Glancing at him, she hooked her arms around his neck and unbuttoned his shirt with one hand. Her movements were clumsy and she couldn't undo it for a long time. In the end, she angrily pulled it off. Little one, what's the hurry? He chided her. Pei Chichi's eyes were watery. Her hands hung softly around his neck and her face was pressed against his neck. It was soft and indescribably alluring. Tang Yu's heart was about to melt. This little one. He held her with one hand and filled the bathtub with warm water with the other. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her, murmuring, let's take a bath together, Pei Chichi raised her head and accepted his kiss. Then, their clothes fell apart. She only woke up when they were soaking in the water together. She opened her eyes and her body was bobbing up and down. She hurriedly clung onto him. Tang Yu lay on his back a little absent-mindedly and patted her back. Chichi, when are we going to get married again? She was a little stunned. Then, she lay in his arms and murmured, how many times have I been married? He couldn't help but laugh. He kissed her little face. Pei Chichi, you know it yourself. Who asked you to lose me? She grumbled. Then, she crawled over and hugged his neck, kissing him. The kiss made Tang Yu's blood boil. He couldn't bear to be cruel to her before, but now, this little one was offering herself to be kissed by him. Tang Yu pressed down on her little head and kissed her deeply, allowing the kiss to ignite the fire in his body. In the end, they went to the bedroom to complete their second round of lovemaking. Unlike the last time, it was obvious that she was more into it this time. Occasionally, when he was heavy, she would gently bite her lips and meow like a kitten. Tang Yu did not dare to be too rough. This time, she followed her feelings and superimposed them over and over again. Finally, she was thrown high into the sky and slowly landed. She was a little scared in his arms. Her trembling made Tang Yu's heart ache, as if he had bullied her. He coaxed her for a long time before she fell asleep. Tang Yu didn't sleep. He looked at the book for a long time before putting it away. Pei Chichi fell asleep. He sat alone on the balcony for a long time, smoking a cigarette and looking at the night sky outside. His cell phone rang twice. He walked over to take a look. It was a call from Qin Anlan. Tang Yu picked it up and said calmly, "Anlan. Tang Yu, treat her well." Qin Anlan's voice was even lonelier than the night sky. He only said 6 simple words. Tang Yu held the empty wine glass in his hand and smiled. "I will." Between men, there was usually no need to say too much to understand each other's intentions. Liang Yu hung up and turned to look at Pei Chichi. She was hugging the blanket and sleeping soundly. She kicked the blanket away, probably because she was afraid of the heat. She only had a bathrobe on, and now that it was all spread out, it was extremely alluring. Tang Yu put down the glass in his hand, got up and walked over to her. He bent down and kissed her. His voice was low and deep. "Chichi." Chapter 1155. It was gentle and charming the whole night. Pei Chichi didn't wake up until noon. She opened her eyes and looked around. This was the rose garden, where she had stayed for one night. "You're awake." Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her little mouth. His voice was a little hoarse. Pei Chichi looked up at him helplessly. After a long time, she asked softly, "How did I get here?" Tang Yu sat next to her and said in a low voice, "Early in the morning, my family called and said that Xiaoshan had diarrhea, so I came back." Pei Chichi sat up and asked, "How is she now?" Tang Yu reached out and gently pinched her little face. "You're not angry with her anymore?" "I'm talking business with you." Pei Chichi pulled down his hand and said coquettishly. Tang Yu smiled. "I've been to the hospital and I'm much better after taking medicine." Pei Chichi lifted the quilt. "I'll go and have a look." Tang Yu stopped her. "Wait a minute." Pei Chichi looked at him in confusion. He smiled. "Chichi, change your clothes before you go." She ran to the bathroom suspiciously and came back after a while. She put her little face in his neck and bit hard to vent her anger. Tang Yu let her do whatever she wanted and just reminded her, "My mother and Uncle Zhao will come for lunch at noon." "Chichi, are you sure you want to keep this?" Pei Chichi stared at him. Tang Yu hugged her. "Didn't you say you're going to see Xiaoshan? Change your clothes, be good." He stroked her hair, as if he was treating his little daughter. He was simply spoiling her rotten. Pei Chichi pouted, "I really don't know how I used to like you." He buttoned up her clothes for her and said in all seriousness, "Actually, Chichi, I was the one who liked you first." Her eyes were very bright. If she didn't care about Xiaoshan, she would have pestered him to tell her about the past. She ran to Xiaoxin's bedroom. The baby was lying on the bed, happily stealing food. Tang Yu followed behind Pei Chichi and saw that she was trying to hide the milk emperor bag by the door. He coughed lightly and said, "The doctor said that I can't eat for 12 hours. She carefully handed over the little Milk King bun, and before Tang Yu came over, she took a small bite. Pei Chichi finally understood why Xiaoshan was so fat. She and Tang Yu were obviously not fat. Tang Yu was both annoyed and amused by Shin's behavior. He reached out and patted her chubby little palm. "Don't do this again." His little heart was hit. He howled and then obediently lay in Pei Chichi's arms. Pei Chichi's heart was about to melt when she saw such a fragrant and soft little fellow lying obediently in her arms. Just as she was about to speak, Xiaoshan made a gu sound. Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu and Tang Yu looked at Xiaoshan. The fat little fellow was dejected. "I'm going to poop." She had just eaten, but she went in and pooped again. Xiaoxin's little face was red and she made a lot of noises. Pei Chichi felt sorry for her, so she accompanied her, although it was very smelly. She probably gave birth to it. Later, she washed Xiaoshan and put her on the bed. Tang Yu brought a cup of water over and served the little princess. Being surrounded by so many people, little Shin became a little arrogant. She was especially arrogant. Tang Yu was about to scold her. In fact, he wanted to scare her, but Pei Chichi didn't allow it. She hugged him and said shamelessly, "Don't scold her. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."